Live in 5, 4, 3.
Hey y'all, thank you so much for joining us today. This is basically the most important show I've ever done, even though I've done over 300. We are joined by some incredibly important, courageous people today. Mr. Temujin Kensu is joining us from prison in Michigan. His fiance, who has been a godsend in setting this up, is also joining us, and then his attorney is also joining us. So we have 3 guests today who are all going to be helping to share Temujin's story. So Temujin, I cannot thank you enough. And I stated before we got on the air, this is your platform. We'll talk as long as you want, and you are free to discuss whatever you like. This is your time, absolutely. So just to give the viewers a heads up who are not familiar with this story, you are in Michigan, and the morning of November 5th, 1986, at a community college, there was a shooting of a 20-year-old man named Scott Macklem. So tell us how that involves you.
Would you like me to start? I was living in a small cabin in the Jetto area, probably about a half hour from Port Huron in the summer of 1986. And I met a woman at a shopping mall named Crystal Merrill. She was working in a video store, and she hit on me. And she asked me out. And I was young, and like a lot of young men back then, I was trying to sow my oats, I suppose. And I agreed to go out to have dinner with her. We went out that night. We went to a Chinese restaurant, drove around for a while, and then we went down to the beach by my cabin. We had relations, came back to the cabin, and she went home from there. She came back early the next morning, and for the next 2 weeks, she was at my place every single morning, demanding that I go places with her, that I pay attention to her, and so on. And she got a little obsessive, talking about marriage and going off and getting an apartment. And I was also in a relationship with my son's mother, Michelle, at that time, who's one of my principal alibi witnesses. And eventually, Crystal showed up at a party uninvited, a very important individual, had a large gathering of people there making a scene. I came out from the gentleman's property. This would have been the second or third week in June of 1986. And told her, that's it, I'm done, no more, don't come around here anymore, don't bother anymore. So she began to threaten me and scream at me and tell me I was going to pay for this and so on and so on. And I was very, very nervous because I had a probation violation warrant at that time from a bad check charge from Washington State. So I was trying to avoid any law enforcement contact. And I was living with a friend of mine, Tom Ford, and Michelle at that time. And Tom and I sat down and discussed it. And Tom said, listen, this girl's crazy. She's stalking you. She's obsessed with you. She's going to be a problem. You need to figure out what you're going to do here. And that relationship lasted actually a grand total of about 3 weeks, because I actually met her in May, the end of May. Anyway, so Tom and I talked about it. We drove up north one day and stopped at a little gas station across the bridge in Sault Ste. Marie. And we're talking to a waitress. I said, what's a nice place up here? And she said, well, there's all kinds of nice cities up here. And we just kind of did the blind finger on a map thing, found the city of Escanaba, drove all the way through to Escanaba. In the morning, we went around the town. We really liked the town. And Tom and I said, this is a great place to live. Let's move up here. So we went back down. We packed all of our things. And I think the first or second week of July, we were gone. I want to say the first week of July, actually, because we celebrated July 4th with some fireworks. And we packed all of our things. We moved up north, and we never went back again. Tom and I eventually had a falling out over financial matters. Shelley and I were living together in a farmhouse in a little city called Rock outside of Escanaba. And I had not spoken to Tom in probably about 2 weeks. So I stayed in town in Escanaba with some friends. And when I got up in the morning, I went over to a friend of mine, Paul DeMar's house, who's also one of my alibi witnesses. There are several of them from town that are involved in this part of the story. And while I was at Paul's, he was making breakfast. We got a phone call from Dash Deal, who is also one of my alibi witnesses and a very strident defender of me to this day. And Dash said, listen, I don't know what's going on. He said, but the police want you for the murder of Tom. And I was like, oh my goodness, Tom Ford's dead. And I love Tom. We'd had a falling out, but he was a childhood friend. I had enormous affection for Tom. And I couldn't believe it. And I said, where are you getting this from? And he said, well, Mike Olson's dad's a probation officer. This is again in Escanaba, which is Delta County. And he said, that's the story that he got. So I called Mike Olson. And Mike Olson said, I'm not supposed to talk to you. My dad said you're wanted. And again, the murder of Tom Ford came up. So I was heartbroken. Obviously, I didn't kill Tom Ford, but more importantly, I love Tom like a brother, even with our falling out. And so I called Tom's, and now just so you understand, everything that I'm telling you now is documented by my phone record. So there's a chain that it's part of the story that's actually confirmed by all the phone calls that I made. So I began to call Tom's family. So now bear in mind, if I had thought that I was wanted for killing somebody else besides Tom Ford, I would have been calling anybody but Tom Ford's family. And so when I called Tom's family, they wouldn't speak to me. And I had known them since I was a little child. And I was very close to them, and I spent, thousands of hours in their home playing and things. And Tom's mother wouldn't tell me anything. I called Tom's father. He wouldn't tell me anything. And I called Tom's sister, and she wouldn't tell me anything. So then I was sure something bad had happened. And I was saying, please just tell me, is Tom okay? I called Michelle, and I told her all of this. And Michelle knew Tom also for many years, and so she was very upset. Again, we suspected nothing having to do with Port Huron. So I said, Shelly, I don't know what to do. I said, so I'm gonna go drive down there and find out what's going on. And so then what you see in my phone bills is calls to Tom's family and calls to the Flint Police Department, because Tom and I were from the Flint area, which is Genesee County. And again, suspecting nothing having to do with Port Huron. So I eventually spoke to Detective Sergeant Thomas A. Hurt at the Flint Sheriff's Department, and my phone records indicate that. And I was saying, hey, listen, I'm supposed to be wanted for the murder of this friend of mine. And they kept saying, there's no dead Tom Ford. And I said, maybe you have a body and you don't have a name. No, we don't have any John Does. And so then I said, well, listen, I have a warrant for a probation violation from Washington. Maybe you're looking for me for that. And he literally ran me and nothing came up. Nothing was showing. And Port Huron confirmed that all of this was true. So again, suspecting nothing about Port Huron, I'm calling everybody I can think of to find out about Tom. I called another mutual friend of ours, Deanna Bomar. That's the girl that I was actually with when I was arrested. And I went to see Deanna down in the Warren area, and had planned on driving back over to Flint to see Tom's family and try to confront them personally. When I called up to Michelle, I was giving her regular reports on what was going on. She had told me this would be the 12th. Or just to go back a little bit, it was November 9th that I learned that I was supposedly wanted for Tom's murder. And of course, the actual murder happened on November the 5th. So now it's the 12th. I've been on the road for this day and then spending 2 days trying to figure all this out, calling people and things. And so it had been the 13th. That I called Michelle again, and she said there were some men here, some guys with guns, and they said they wanted to hunt on the property. Now, it turned out these were law enforcement officers disguised as hunters. And we had a large farm with 40 acres of property in a very desolate area. And I said, well, you know what, Shelly, I don't know what's going on right now, but I don't want guys on our property with guns. And she was there pregnant and alone. And I said, just tell them no. Turned out they were actually cops watching the place. So I told Deanna what was going on about that. I said, I'm going to call back and check on Michelle and make sure she's okay, which my phone records indicate again. And when I called her back, a man answered the phone. And this was Officer John Bounce. This is the gentleman who was prosecuted for corruption by the Michigan Attorney General's office. He was known as the most notorious and corrupt cop in the Port Huron, St. Clair County area at that time. He was involved in drugs and mob involvement and everything else. And he answers the phone, and of course, I flip out because my pregnant girlfriend is there in this farmhouse out in the woods by herself, and there's a guy on our phone. And I said, who is this? He says, well, who is this? I said, well, obviously you must know who I am, or you wouldn't be in my home. What are you doing there? And he says, well, you're Fred Freeman. I said, yeah, I'm Fred Freeman. What's going on? And he says, well, I'm here to arrest you for murder. And I said, the murder of who? Meanwhile, Shelly has been freaking out for like 7 hours. And they're tearing my house up with no warrants. They took Shelly pregnant in the middle of a blizzard in sub-zero temperatures, and they stuck her in an unheated police car in the back seat, barefoot and pregnant now, with just sweatpants and a little cotton shirt on. And they left her out there for hours while they destroyed our home. They refused to give her a copy of a warrant for anything, which we confirmed later on. And we have the actual arrest warrant, which said no search. And I'm battling with this guy on the phone to try to get some information and find out what's going on. I'm like, look, I didn't kill Tom Ford. Oh, no, I don't want you for Tom Ford. I want you for Scott. I said, who the hell is Scott? He says, come on, Fred. You know who Scott is, the guy you shot in the parking lot. I said, what parking lot? So now I have no idea what's going on. So I keep demanding, and so I said, listen, I don't even know if you're a real cop or not. I said, put Shelly on the phone right now, or I'm just hanging up and I'm calling the police. And they actually let Shelly get onto the phone, and she's crying and she's yelling. You know, they're destroying the house. They won't show me a warrant. They say you supposedly killed Crystal's boyfriend. I was like, Crystal Merrill? And that was the first time we had heard this. Bounds gets back on the phone, and now I'm furious. And I'm like, you coward, you know, you're abusing this poor little girl. And then he starts threatening me and telling me I'm going to go down in a hail of bullets and I'm going to die for this. It was just this silly 1970s television cop nonsense. And I was like, yeah, okay, buddy. Who the hell is this Scott guy? Why am I supposed to have killed him? And of course, he won't tell me any of that either. So I make him put Michelle back on the phone. And then I say to myself, Shelly, I'm going to call Crystal. I'm going to find out what's going on. So in those days, you had phone cards. We didn't have the technology we have now. Of course, we didn't have cell phones. And using my phone card, I called Crystal. Her father answered. I was like, you know, what's going on? I don't know anything. They put Crystal on the phone. And for the next 2.5 hours, she was just blathering insane nonsense about ninjas and just crazy stuff. So if you look at the police reports and in the notes, you'll see me accusing her of things. Me saying nothing has anything to do with the case whatsoever. 13 pages of this. Now, later on, they wrote a fake report saying I had said all these things about the crime, which they based on the notes. It took us a year, but we got the notes. Nothing they said that I said was in the notes. Instead, the notes have me calling her a psycho, saying, why would I kill your boyfriend? Then there's a note like he's asking for coffee. There's nothing about the case, nothing incriminating whatsoever. I'm accusing Crystal of probably having done this herself because she's a whack. I was like, what, is this some guy you were stalking after you were stalking me? Things like that. And what they were doing, though, of course, they were tracking the phone. And that was at a Winchell's Donut Shop in the Troy area. So they had called it SWAT while I was there, and they came to get me, and they arrested me at the donut shop. Troy was really nice. The Troy police were very nice. They said to me, you're supposed to be some Rambo ninja super assassin killing machine, and we were told you've got poison darts taped to your wrists and steel blades in your shoes and swords and all this crazy stuff, right? And, of course, none of that was true. So the first thing they did was they said, can we search you? And they were a little nervous. And I said, of course you can. They searched me, and I'm completely unarmed. And I was like, what's going on, guys? What is all this? And so they told me the stories that Port Huron had made up about me. And that was the tone of the case from the very beginning to the end, was just these crazy stories they made up, totally unsubstantiated, not based on any facts, not corroborated by anyone. And they took me down to the St. Clair County Jail in Port Huron, and they threw me in the maximum security section, and without even interviewing me. And to my knowledge, I'm the only person ever charged with a murder like this who was never interviewed by the police. They literally just threw me in the jail and they charged me with murder, and the police never interviewed me. And several days later, they fed me this ex-prosecutor crack addict, David Michael Dean, to be my attorney. And thus the story begins.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible that they didn't even interview you.
No, ma'am. They refused to, actually. Yeah.
You have, I mean, your story, as trite as it sounds, if you made it in a movie, it wouldn't seem feasible. It's just really incredible.
Thank you.
You have countless witnesses that you were over 400 miles away when
Correct.
This took place.
Almost 500. Yeah.
Yes. And you also have witnesses that were in the parking lot where it did take place that said you weren't there.
Correct.
So,
that's correct, yeah.
So,
and the most important witnesses, they deliberately did not call. So, for example, the two that cover the most important time periods, which are, I went out on a very friendly date with a girl that I knew named Beth Spears. We went out and had dinner at a nice restaurant, and this went on until about probably 1:30 in the morning. And we stopped at a big boy right across the street, and my car would not start. And I'd had problems with this car. It was a Ford, a Mercury Marquis, actually, which is, technically a Ford. And I'd had problems with the car starting and the battery charging, and it was very, very cold. It was probably 20 below. And so the vehicle wouldn't start. So I called Paul DeMars, the same guy, and Paul came out to help jump the car. So Paul saw me there with Beth. Paul, Beth, and I went into the big boys. We knew the manager there. His nickname was Scruffy, Jeff McNamara. And that particular night, Tuesday night, was cream of broccoli soup night, or it was broccoli with cheddar cheese, I think. So they only had it that night. And so Scruffy specifically recalled that it was late and they had a big crock pot full of this stuff. So he gave us free large cups of the soup. So I went next door and got battery cables, which I had to pay a deposit for, and came back, and we took about 45 minutes to charge the car. And then, because I was afraid the car was going to break down again, Paul took Beth and drove her back to her car, which was at the Ponderosa where she worked. And because I had picked her up there at her workplace. And then from there, she drove home. So the reason this matters is, number one, the soup was only that night. And Scruffy, of course, was working that night. Number two, the gentleman that I got the cables from had my $25 deposit, which I had to go get back. They refused to even interview the guy. They wouldn't even go speak to him. Then when Paul DeMars confirmed what I had to say, they eliminated the entire part about Beth. Now, I didn't know Beth's real last name. I just knew her as a friend. I'd seen her once or twice, and I asked her if she wanted to go out, and we just had dinner. So I didn't know her last name. So when I tell the police this name through my lawyer, they come back later and they go, oh, we found that girl you're talking about. She doesn't remember anything. I'm like, well, that's not true. And other people saw me in the Big Boy as well. And so, of course, when I got home, I didn't get home till like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. Now, bear in mind, I'm about 500 miles away, because Rock is another 45 miles from Escanaba, but it's way out in the woods. This is back when the speed limit was 55. The roads were covered in ice back then. I'm in this giant boat, so I'm driving very carefully. And because I had the warrant, I was always careful to never speed. So, of course, I didn't get any traffic infractions that entire time. I was a super careful driver. So to kill Scott, I would have gotten back to the farmhouse out in Rock after this date. Now think for a second. Why, if I'm planning to kill this guy downstate in a couple of hours, why am I staying out on a date all night with this girl? And everyone said I wasn't trying to rush. I wasn't trying to get out of there. I was taking my sweet time. In fact, I wanted to wait for the car to charge longer, and Beth was afraid she was going to get in trouble. She was already very late. So Paul, as I said, drove her back to her car, and then she went home. Paul stopped by to see me on the way back. The car was running okay, and once he checked that I was all right, I pulled out and I left and drove. Now, I've got a 25-minute drive to the farmhouse, and suppose I'm supposed to be downstate waiting to kill somebody by 8 o'clock, like I said, about 500 miles away. We have the highway reports that show that that's US 2 and 41 up there, were shut down in large sections on the 4th, 5th, and 6th. So the day before the murder, the day of the murder, and the day after the murder. We have that right from the Highway Commission. And I'm supposed to rush down there to be waiting for Scott in this parking lot in just a couple of hours from, like I said, almost 500 miles away, and across the Mackinac Bridge, by the way, too. And when the speed limit was still 55. So once again, it shows you how crazy this is. So besides lying about Beth, and you may know now, we just found Beth after all these years. We actually thought that she had passed away. We had some bad information on her name. We found a Beth that matched her name and description that had passed away in, I believe, 2008 or 2009 from cancer. Well, it turns out that wasn't her. We found the real Beth, and she's one of my defenders now also. But more importantly, they didn't call Michelle. Now, Michelle is my son's mother. She's passed several polygraphs since then. And she covers the exact time of the murder that I'm at home with her in bed in the farmhouse. She covers when we got up, what we did through that entire day. And as I get into town on the 5th, everybody that saw me on the 5th saw me with Michelle. So my Taekwondo instructor friend, John Manali, the kids from the school, Mike Olson, Amy Cretin, Dash Deal, the people from the treasure chest store, the lady from the real estate agency, and so on. Kathy Dyer, the martial arts student who was running the class only on that day on Wednesday. Mark Sherman was there at the school. He knew it was Wednesday because his daughter had I think it was a PTA event or something similar to that, but he knew it was that day on Wednesday, and he had to leave class early for that. So again, there were a bunch of other factors that confirmed that I was there that specific day and those specific times. And then, of course, guess what? My car broke down in town again. And so I had to leave it at the Kmart's. And there's a time-dated stamped receipt from the Kmart's with my handwritten signature on it and my home address. And a note from the managers, Mr. Gene Lundquist and Patrick Burkholz, I believe were their names, and saying, make sure you don't tow this guy's car, because I went and spoke to them. I said, please don't tow my car. I'm not abandoning it. It's broken down. I'm going to come back in the morning and get it. And this is through the day of the 5th. So they deliberately tried to hide most of that from the jury. They didn't call the people from the treasure chest store. They didn't call the real estate agent who had my name in a blotter by noon. They didn't call some of the other students from the martial arts school. They didn't call Michelle, and they didn't call Beth. So all the most important witnesses they didn't call. And then, since I can still prove I'm in town by 11 o'clock, they came up with the I must have flown a secret airplane theory. And then Robert Cleland brought in his own personal pilot from his campaigns for the Attorney General's office, pretended that he didn't know the guy. His gentleman's name was Robert Evans. He's since passed away. He pretended he didn't know who this person was, and then had him get in the stand to say, well, he could have flown a secret airplane. And they made up this insane story that this is the actual quote. There's a lot of pilots just sitting around polishing their planes, waiting for somebody to get a ride like it's a taxi. I don't know where in America that happens, but it sure wasn't happening in the UP at that time. And it cost about $1,000 to $1,200 a chart or something like that each way back then. And so that was their theory to get around the unshakable alibi. And so, of course, my lawyer, Dean, who was a drug addict, former prosecutor, he was an undercover informant, he was working with the prosecution and the judge. And so he deliberately didn't call that long string of important witnesses. And then he let them get away with the plain stuff and everything else they did. He really didn't fight for me at all during the entire trial.
Yeah, when I read that plain theory,
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. And they're actually kind of back to when it happened. There are no eyewitnesses to anything dealing with the shooting.
Nobody saw any kind of crime. No.
And
the one witness, Rennie Gobain, everything that he made up was actually completely contradicted by, for example, forensics experts. The story was that I was supposedly sitting next to Scott in a car, and that supposedly I shot him out the window of this car, this mystery car. And then I supposedly drove off. The problem is people heard a bang, and there was already a car driving away, so there was no car sitting in the spot next to Scott's. It would have had to have just been, blazing tires and engine to get out and squeal off, change gears and take off in the other direction. The only car I was ever seen was moving very slowly. Rennie tried to say it was moving slightly faster than normal, whatever that means for a parking lot. And obviously that was not the killer in that car. Scott was shot in his lower left flank. The round was moving at a sharp upper right angle, and the pellets were exiting under his armpit. So he was not shot from a car window. We've had multiple experts look at this. Robert Cleland knew all of this, but he also knew the jury didn't understand what was going on. And juries, unfortunately, especially back then, juries are much more aware now, and thanks to social media and this awakened state we're starting to be in, we don't just buy everything they tell us. But back then, a prestigious man like Robert Cleland says this is what happened. Well, this is just what must have happened. But even as a kid, as a 23-year-old kid, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm thinking about car windows and heights, and I'd had a lot of cars, and I used to race, and that round is too low and the angle's too high. If you set a shotgun on a ledge, you're going to get a relatively straight, narrow shot. And more importantly, he was shot by somebody so close to him that the wadding was actually inside of his body, and there were powder burns on the coat. So he was not shot by somebody in the car from 12 feet away, pointing the gun out a window. And as I say, the rounds were cutting upward from the diaphragm up through organs. I'm very sorry about how unpleasant that is. And actually the pellets were exiting under his armpit. So he wasn't shot in some straight across shot. He was, I think, 6'1" or 6'2". This person, whoever had the gun, was holding it down low and shooting upward. Now, bang, and there's a car driving away. But the problem was there was another car across from Scott that went off in a different direction. There was a female in that car. So several witnesses said they saw a female kitty corner from Scott's car. They heard a bang. So they saw the girl shrug. I think she was actually throwing a gun into the car if it was a female killer. And that she got a red car, and drove off in the other direction. Crystal had a red Camaro Berlinetta at that time. And so for the longest time, I actually thought Crystal was the murderer. And I really pushed that. I was sure. She was crazy. She stalked me. She threatened me. She was saying insane things. I really believe that she was the killer. But Cleland's job was to frame somebody for it to cover up the real reason why Scott was killed. And we now know he was likely killed over drugs based on countless interviews that our detective friend Herb Welser has done.
Right. And he was the son of a prominent politician, which
correct. Yep.
Just
who
makes
contributed
it
a lot
all
of
the
money
more
to Robert
feasible.
Cleland. Yeah, and he contributed money to Robert Cleland's campaigns. Robert Cleland ran for the Attorney General's office the year of the murder. He lost the day before the murder. He ran again in 1990, even though he wasn't wanted whatsoever, and he had a horrible following. Macklin contributed more money to Cleland. That's what we were told. And Cleland ran again for the Attorney General in Michigan in 1990 and was defeated again. But he lost the first election the day before the murder. When the murder happened and they figured out what had happened, they sent John Bounds, who went out there by himself to that college parking lot. And, we can prove it. They admitted they never secured the crime scene. They did no forensic work whatsoever. The only photographs they took were basically after Scott's body was gone and there was a blood trail and all the wrappings and things from the EMT technicians. There was a gym bag that we know was moved, and there were car keys in the car door that we know were moved because that was reported as being there, but that's not what the photos show. We think John Bounds went out there and sterilized the crime scene. John Bounds was working with the Drug Task Force at that time. This is the mayor's son selling drugs. We had that from numerous individuals. And this infuriates the Macklin family, but some of these people that we're dealing with made it very clear that the Macklins knew what Scott was doing. More importantly, though, Crystal knew. And the sad thing about all of this is that there's so much evidence that Scott was having problems long before I met Crystal and after I was gone and living far away. And they never once questioned her about any of this. And when Scott was killed, and this is so important for listeners to understand, when Scott was killed, it wasn't, oh my God, I know who did it. It's my crazy ex-boyfriend. He's a ninja. She made all those stories up later. Her initial statement is she's got no idea. He's got no enemies. Nobody would want to hurt him. His parents, Gary and Pat Macklem, had no idea who I was and had no idea if anybody would want to hurt Scott. That's their actual initial statement. So nobody's saying that this is me. Tracy Merrill, Crystal's sister, said, well, she did have this boyfriend, he's like a martial arts guy, and he rides a motorcycle leather jacket, and John Bounds instantly just glommed onto that and said, tell me about this guy. And apparently Crystal had said something to the effect of, no, we broke up, I haven't seen him, I never saw him again, something like that. But that was it. Bounds was obsessed. And Bounds literally decided that day I was going to be the guy. And he made me the guy. So you have the crooked cop with the mob involvement, prosecuted by the AG's office, who was told he will never get his job back by the chief of police, which was Townsend at that time. In a public statement, this man will never get his job back. Next thing you know, he gets his job back. And Robert Cleland's working with him, and he's covering up the murder of Scott Macklem. His partner, Harry Hudson, admitted in interviews that he wasn't allowed to do anything on the case, even though he was a senior detective with homicide experience. John Bounds had never done a homicide. So Harry Hudson, the experienced homicide officer, was relegated to the background, and John Bounds controlled the entire case. He took no notes, refused to give us any work product whatsoever, harassed and threatened numerous witnesses, including Kathy Dyer and Michelle, of course. And Harry Hudson himself admitted, like, John Bounds and Cleland are doing this all themselves. And I'm just kind of back here being told to shut up. They didn't want to hear his expertise. They didn't want to hear anything. Harry Hudson also admitted on the stand during my trial that they had other suspects. And the minute he admitted that, and I made my lawyer ask that question because he wouldn't ask it, the minute he admitted that, Robert Cleland stood up and objected and started having a fit to stop Harry from speaking further. And the judge basically let Cleland shut up Harry Hudson. And so Harry Hudson never divulged who those suspects were or the nature of their involvement with Scott. But you might know we have reports from multiple people that say that Scott was being harassed at his workplace by these two individuals that he knew. Of course, Scott had never met me. These two individuals. And so the first report says these guys came into the store. They were threatening and harassing Scott. Scott challenged them to a fight. And apparently they left at some point. The second report says these guys came back in later on and Scott was scared of them and he hid in the back of the store. They hid all of that information from us. And of course, they used none of it at trial. And my lawyer, David Dean, didn't call any of the witnesses from the store, but we still have the police reports that prove this happened.
That is just absolutely incredible. Your attorney, Keith Altman, I want to bring you in to ask you, how many times during what we talked about could, how many things could have technically given him a new trial out of all the discrepancies and everything like that? Why wasn't any of those things automatically said, you know what, this case should be thrown out, he needs, it needs to be looked at again, this is complete shit?
Because people need to be case. You know what it is? They double down, people make an error, and they double down on their error, and they don't want to admit the fact that maybe they were wrong, and they don't want to admit that the facts just don't add up. And we see this all the time, in many different contexts where people just are so convinced that they're right that no matter what you show them, they're just not willing to change. There are so many times that somebody should have woken up and said, something just isn't right here. And many people did do that, but those that were in control and had the opportunity to see things get done the right way just decided we're not going to do that. We're going to stand by what we had because, God forbid, it would come out that we were wrong. That would just be, unforgivable. And unfortunately, that's what happens here. And Kensu is the victim of this. Absolutely.
Yeah, of course, there's the issue of Robert Cleland. The first appellate action I received from a court was in the spring of 1990, when now everybody, including Robert Cleland himself, publicly stated, he said, we expect this case to come right back on appeal. He knew how bad it was. He was appointed by Bush Sr. in the summer of 1990 to a United States District Court federal judgeship in the Eastern District of Michigan in the Southern Division. That's a very powerful and lifetime appointment. The first court action that I received was in the spring of 1990. My case was sent back for what are called Ginther and Walker hearings, which are evidentiary hearings, and hearings to look at where the attorney might have gone wrong also. And they were going fine. The phony inmate jail snitch, and of course they have these all the time in these cases where they have no evidence and they're trying to frame someone. They go get a jail snitch. He was admitting that he had made the entire story up. We had the documentation of the secret deal that he received, which my judge was involved in. There's actually handwritten notes saying the judge wants this done for this guy. This is the same judge, James T. Corden, who turned to my jury and said, I want the jury to know that this man received no special favors whatsoever for his testimony. By then, they'd agreed to drop a string of felonies, reinstate his probation, put him in a correction center, had given him cash, bought him cartons of cigarettes, a VCR. They broke all the MDOC's policies on letting a man who on escape status with felonies even go back to a correction center. This is all Judge Corden and Prosecutor Thomas Houlihan and Robert Cleland and John Bounds that arranged this. And we had all the documents, we had everything, we had all the proof. We had my lawyer in there who we now knew was a drunk and a druggie. And I had been saying this, but nobody was listening. Now we knew he was under investigation. He eventually lost his license by 1991, the next year. Anyway, so it was looking great. And there was a two-part hearing. And suddenly I wasn't allowed to attend the second half of the hearing, which by law I'm allowed to attend. And the next thing you know, the judge waits I think 8 months and then rules for himself on his own misconduct in the case. And then says, oh, I was the neutral and unbiased observer, and his lawyer did a bang-up job, and we don't care about the snitch, admitting that he lied about everything. And by the way, he doesn't even mention the secret deal he made with his notes and his orders on the paperwork. And we're like, how is this possible? Well, remember, we didn't have the internet in those days. It took time to find things out back then. If you didn't get it from the media, it was very, very hard to get information. And so all your young listeners probably can't even imagine a world where you can't just get something at your fingertips. It could take weeks or months or years to find just a document or a photo or a name. And so we had no idea what was going on. And then somebody said, hey, Robert Cleland's a federal judge now. You could have heard the brake stop on the bus. From that point on, every appeal with dozens of reversible issues, inflammatory comments, witness intimidation, sufficiency, great weight of the evidence, prosecutorial misconduct. It just goes on and on and on. All of which should have been grounds for reversal were just thrown out by the court again and again and again and again by Michigan's appellate court system. Now, one of my defenders is Chief Justice Thomas Brennan, probably one of the most distinguished attorneys in the state and perhaps in the nation. He has an amazing reputation, founder of Cooley Law School, which now runs the Innocence Project at Cooley. And Justice Brennan is one of my defenders. And when they went to him, they said, you were the chief of the court at that time. How could this have happened? He said, what are you talking about? I've never heard of this case. And he could have just clamped up and said, I don't want to speak. But instead, I believe the man was absolutely honest. He had no idea about this case. And they said, well, you must know about it. It's Robert Cleland's involved. And it was a high-profile murder. And this man says he was framed. And he's got dozens of appellate issues. And none of them are getting any proper review. And he actually said, you know what? I want to know what's going on here. And I will look at this stuff. And we have I think he gave an hour and 47-minute interview initially to the ABC crew. And this is what he had to say, among other things. I was the Chief Justice. I should have known about this case. This should have been brought to my attention. I swear to you, I never saw this. And I absolutely believe the man, too, because he's been a defender ever since. So he really put his reputation on the line to come out against the people that did this to me. He had my wife over for dinner. He gave long interviews, and he said this was a travesty of justice. And he said, quote, I hope I would have had the courage to throw this thing out right away if it had come before me. So how is the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court never saw the most controversial case in this state, never even heard about it? It means that clerks and other judges kept it from his knowledge. There was an agreement at some point to protect Robert Cleland, and so Justice Brennan never heard a peep about this case. But he was a man of so much integrity that he bucked the system, knowing what it was going to do to him. And he came out and he said, this is a travesty of justice, this is horrible, and if I had seen this, I hope that I would have had the guts to throw this thing out. Since then, Justice Shapiro has said the same thing about my case, that Crystal's stories were insane and just complete nonsense. I had a full reversal from the Chief Justice of the Eastern District, Robert Cleland's boss, by the way. Judge Denise Page Hood wrote a long opinion, completely acknowledging my innocence, that this is all fabricated garbage, that I was framed. She talks about the Philip Joplin thing, about Robert Cleland's personal involvement in all of this, and basically says my colleague framed an innocent man for murder. So, Joy, you have to understand the firestorm that created. That's never been done in American history as far as we can tell, where a Chief Justice says the judge in their own court framed an innocent man for murder. Lawyers across the state filed motions to get Cleland off cases. Inmates started filing petitions to get Cleland off cases. He didn't even show up to their big annual conference and dinner, which he had never missed since he was appointed in 1990. And so what's the case? What happens? The case goes to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, and suddenly they tear it apart on a technicality. Oh, well, I was late under the Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act, and there's a gateway for innocence, and we're not quite convinced you're innocent, so we're going to hold you to this crazy standard. The person that wrote that opinion is David W. McKeague, not just a friend of Robert Cleland's, but a man that I had gone to war with in 1996 while I was at this prison. He has been on all of my denials by the U.S. District Court ever since. I won another partial ruling in 2017 saying I was framed with fake photographs, which they lied about. We have the actual originals and the fakes. We have a fake photo board they made, which they lied about in court, and then they lied about having for 24 years. And I got this wonderful 9-page ruling from the Sixth Circuit saying he's won on the attorney misconduct, he's won on the prosecutorial misconduct, and he can't even discuss the issue of innocence because we've already talked about that, but he doesn't need to because he won on these two issues. So we thought, hey, he's going home again. No. The Sixth Circuit took my case, and I want the listeners to understand, again, a thing that never happens, and they took my case out of Michigan after multiple judges pulled off it and refused to rule or be involved. And they sent the case down to the Northern District in Kentucky, and they gave it to a judge named William Bertelsmann, who was retired, I think he was like 88 years old, a retired conservative, and they gave it to him, who was absolutely going to protect Cleland, by the way. And he overturns his boss's ruling, writes this crazy opinion that has nothing to do with my case, says the photos don't even matter. Now, just so you understand, Joy, the jury had one main question, and that was, we want to see those photos. So the jury thought the evidence of the identification was the most important thing in the case. Now, remember at trial, we didn't know they lied. We didn't know about the fake photos, but that was the jury's one serious question, the photos. So that's how important it was to the jury who decided my fate and sent me to prison to die based on what happened at that trial. And Bertelsmann came and said, oh, yeah, that didn't matter. That wasn't important. And so then it goes back to the Sixth Circuit, who should have said, okay, Bertelsmann's crazy, and ruled for me. And guess what they did? They overturned themselves. And David W. McKeague wrote that ruling. And when we filed a motion for reconsideration, University of Michigan's Innocence Clinic, guess who denied the reconsideration? David W. McKeague. So that's the level of corruption. And what people have to understand is once you're caught in this system, it is so hard to get out. And the more controversial your case, like the Memphis 3, the more controversial the case, the more they're going to fight to keep you in there. And the longer they keep you in there, the more people forget about you. They forget the facts. Evidence disappears. Witnesses die. People who might have spoken pass away. And suddenly you're in prison 30, 40 years and you die. And they got away with it. And that's what they're still trying to do this very day. And I know people don't like the word conspiracy because they think of cloak and dagger and the CIA and so on. But there has been an agreement among a group of people with significant power and resources to cover up what happened here, to protect the Macklins, who are very well off, to protect Robert Cleland, who's very politically connected, and to hope that I die in here, which I almost have several times. I did die. I had 2 heart attacks in 1991, and I almost died from a bowel disease and emergency bowel surgery in 2014. But again, that's their goal, to sweep it under the rug, to make it go away. Fortunately, there's been an amazing growing movement. And the last point I would make, I don't want to drone on too long, is that the Innocence Project in New York, they put out a great book, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, and they laid out a test for wrongful convictions. And I think it was 12 basic factors that lead to wrongful convictions. So bad forensics and shoddy police work and inmate snitches and so on. I have 11 of the 12 tests. The only one that we don't have in this case, and I'm the only case that we know of in the whole U.S. that has this. The only thing we don't meet the test on is, the forced beaten confession. And they actually tried to do that to me too, but I wouldn't confess. So they tortured me for a year in the jail to get me to confess.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I can't even fathom how strong you are. Just
well,
seriously.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. You are so inspiring.
Thank you.
I want to kind of digress a bit.
Sure.
And they were trying to, find you at this, at the location where he was murdered. So there was a guy who was at the community college who said he saw a guy in a car And
Right.
even though he had a ski hat type thing pulled down and a
Yeah.
jacket pulled up,
Right.
and
Right.
a community college professor hypnotized him.
That's correct. That was Rennie Gobain, yeah, who, by the way, became a cop. He's the prototypical television, I want to be the star witness guy who would say and do anything. He was trying to talk to the media. I'm surprised the guy didn't try to get a book deal, but nobody wrote books about that stuff back then. Yeah, he was pathetic. He saw nothing. Now, just so the listeners know, I want everybody to understand, because there are going to be some detractors out there, everything that I'm saying to you is a matter of record. So I'm not coming with conjecture. I will give my viewpoints and my opinions about things, but if I tell you something happened, I promise you it's from the transcript. I can show it to you, and I can provide the documentation. In Rennie Gobain's case, what he claimed was his story was very dramatic. You know, he heard a shot, he saw a car, and he just had a feeling. He knew something was going on, and he looked at this vehicle, and he saw this guy. But here's the problem with his story. He says it's an incredibly sunny morning, and he sees this car, this brand new 1986 Ford Escort station wagon, which has never been found and never tied to me in any way, shape, or form, by the way. And but I'll get to the important point about that car in a second. It's a sunny morning, so we know how windshields glare in the morning. It's a bright sunny morning. There's trees and so on, and he's claimed the sun was just beaming, and he got for like 3 seconds this view of this car moving slightly faster than normal, of a man who had a ski hat all the way down to his eyes, and a coat pulled all the way up to his chin, hunched down over the steering wheel of a Ford Escort, and he's a tall guy, and he's looking down. So guess what he would have seen? Maybe a nose. He also claimed the guy had a scruffy beard. So here's the problems with all of that. Number one, he claimed the guy's hair was sticking out under the front of the hat. If you look at my arrest photo, and I didn't have a haircut, you'll see my hair was in like a little punk rock shag, which is very popular, in the 80s, and way too short to be sticking over my eyes. Secondly, of course, everybody that knew me told them I do not wear knit hats. I never wore knit hats. I had a shag. If you wear a knit hat, it ruins the shag, and it was just an ego thing. So even Shelley said he's never worn a knit hat. She knew me since I was like 15. And so what this thing he claims is this little tiny window of like a 2-inch space he could see somebody moving by him for 3 seconds, not including like the car posts and the window beams and so on. And his first story is a tiny bit of what I just said, and quote, no further information available on the driver. But the car he initially identified, and this is important for listeners to understand if you guys want to Google this, he identified a Mazda RX-7 or a Datsun 280Z. So those are little like Corvette-looking cars. They have long fronts, a tiny little short trunk. They're little 2-door sports cars. And they were very popular in the 80s. We don't know why, but to this day, and of course he's never had to explain anything that he's done, he changed the car to a 5-door boxy, it was gold originally too, by the way. He changed to a burgundy 5-door Ford Escort station wagon. You couldn't change a car more if you tried. He might have well put it in a Cadillac hearse. So now here's why this matters to the listeners. I was arrested on the 13th, and as I said, I was in Troy. On the 14th, a call comes in from an anonymous caller saying, and I quote, I just saw that guy you're looking for, Fred Freeman, when my name had not been going out publicly at that time. And he said, and he's in that car, and it's a 86 Ford Escort station wagon. So there's an anonymous caller trying to put me in the murder vehicle on the 14th. And instead of calling the Port Huron area where the police were at and looking for me or whatever, he calls the Mount Clemens State Police Post. So the Detective Sergeant Thomas Ackley, his nickname is Bear Ackley, he actually testified for me and said, yeah, this call came in and this guy was trying to put him in this car. Now, this car had not gone out to the press. There were no public statements been made about this 86 Ford Escort station wagon or me being tied to one in any way, because Rennie had just changed his story from the little Mazda or the Datsun to the big square boxy 5-door wagon. And what the caller didn't know while he said he just saw me in the car was that I'd been in jail since the night prior in Troy. So obviously Rennie Gobain was trying to frame me for this. Now, I cannot pretend to speculate what his motivations were. I mean, he wanted to be the star witness. I don't know if somebody fed him that car. We know he knew Crystal. He actually dated Crystal. We don't know if Crystal said, oh, say this car. We don't know. But there's no question he's a caller. Now, the other way we know Rennie is the caller, and of course this is still a little bit of speculation, was he said he knew the victim's family. And he also said he was, and I love this too, he was a student at the college, and I think he said he was an auto body student or a criminal justice student, one of the two. Well, Rennie was both. Why the caller felt the need to give this additional information, we don't know, but he really tripped up. he was trying to give veracity to his statements to the police and slipped up and gave some of his college information. Well, this person identified the same course load that Rennie was carrying. So here's an anonymous caller trying to put me in the car that only Rennie Gobain made up. And of course, then there's the hypnosis story. And in the hypnosis story, he gave 12 different license plate numbers. And I don't know how much time we have here, but there's an amazing story tied to that too.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to get into that. So absolutely.
Oh, okay, so this is one of the most incredible parts of the story. This just shows you how far they would go. Like the airplane thing, it just shows you how far they were willing to go. Okay. Now I'm in Washington State, and this is well documented all through 1985 until I come back to Michigan. I go down to Tennessee to visit a girlfriend that was down there for a while. Then I go back to Washington, and I had to get permission from Washington State on my little probation check charge thing to come back to Michigan. So I came back to Michigan on what's called an interstate compact. So that's all documented, and of course that's quite a distance. So when I come back to Michigan in the summer of 1985, I go down and I stay with Tom Ford. That's how Tom Ford and I started hanging out again. And he's going to college at the University of Michigan, and he put me up for a little bit in his apartment there. And then eventually I wound up getting my own place with Shelley. But in the meantime, now this is important. During the summer of 1985, apparently a license plate is destroyed by Rinky Cadillac here in Michigan, and that license plate is 882DHH. And it was on, I believe, a Cadillac. I think it was on a large Buick. So Rinky Cadillac claimed that their procedure was they would bend plates in half and break them in two pieces, and then eventually they would throw them in the trash. So remember, 1985, I haven't met Crystal. I'm not in contact with anybody in Michigan until I come back to see Tom. And of course, I called Michelle, say I'm going to come back to Michigan. And I got back here, I think May or June of 85. It's documented. I think it was late May or early June. And so now this is the funny part. So Rennie Gobain gives all these different plate numbers, and for some reason they focus on one, even though he gives incredibly different plate numbers. But they focus on this 882DHH, and it turned out the reason they focused on that plate number is it was the only number that was even a legitimate number for a vehicle that they could find. So it's not that he was sure about this number; it's that he gave 12 different numbers. Only one came back as a valid number. That plate was on a car that was taken in, I think, a trade by Rinky Cadillac in 1985 before I was even back in Michigan. According to Susan Rinky, one of the family owners of the business, they bent that plate in half and they broke it in two pieces and they destroyed it. So this is what Cleveland did. This is how crazy this case is. And when I tell people this, they often can't believe it. We have the documentation, the transcripts, and the actual police reports. Cleveland's theory was that I had somebody get that plate out of the trash, which should have been in two pieces, by the way. To get that plate out of the trash to use, ready, to murder a guy a year and 4 months later over a girl that I hadn't met. And who's my co-conspirator to get the license plate out? While I'm in Washington State, by the way. This is how crazy this is. So when I confront him in court, I'm like, have you lost your mind? That plate was destroyed before I was ever even in the state. And he would never, and he was such a coward. The man he would turn, he would run, he would hide, he would never face me. The only thing he ever told me once was, I said, I didn't do this. And he said, yeah, but you're going down for it. And I said, you guys all heard that, right? It's the only time he ever spoke to me. So anyways, now he comes in and he brings in these people to say, well, so he could have gotten the plate. And they're like, well, I don't know, maybe. So apparently I had somebody here in Michigan digging license plates out of trash bins in a city that I'd never been to in my entire life. A year and a half before I got back to the state to put on a car to kill somebody. Now, so here's the next part of the theory. Maybe that girl, Deanna Bomar, that he was seeing, she lived in the Warren area. Maybe she did it. Okay. Yeah, she lived in the Warren area a year and a half later. In 1985, she lived in Goodrich, Michigan, and she hadn't seen me or talked to me since 1981. So again, he was just making things up. But he knew all of this. He knew this because they had interviewed Deanna. So instead of bringing Deanna in, he just throws it out to the jury. Well, yeah, probably his girlfriend Deanna did this. So my lawyer knows how crazy all of this is. He's supposed to spend time going through the points that I just gave you. None of this is even possible. He wasn't in the state then. According to Rinky, they destroyed those plates. You're just trying to make Rennie look legitimate with this plate number, this whole crazy plate number story. But that's the kind of things they did during this trial. And I would tell people years later, go, oh, that can't be true. That's too crazy. And it's actually part of the record, and I have the reports, and we have the transcripts. And so, of course, they'd interviewed Deanna, and Deanna, knew me at that time and said, I hated Crystal. I couldn't stand her. I never mentioned this Scott guy. I never went back to that area. We never talked about it. We never drove around. None of that was true. she'd met Crystal one time when we stopped by her workplace to say hi for like 2 minutes, and that was it. And she said, no, he's never mentioned either one of those. And she visited me when I lived up in the UP, and she said, no, he never said a word about going down there, hurting anybody. No, he never had any guns, and so on and so on. And obviously Cleveland didn't believe the plate story he made up, or he would have just brought Deanna into the courtroom to say, yeah, this happened. I didn't even see Deanna again until December of 1985, which she confirmed. So she wasn't rooting out plates for me from some trash bin in the summer of 1985 when I was in Washington State, living in the state capital in Olympia, and she hadn't heard from me or talked to me, in 5-6 years. So it's just the insanity of this case, and it's what they did. And the appellate courts would look at that and just completely ignore it, like it was okay to do all of that. And they did this time and time and time and time again. And I think the jury was just so confused watching this, like, oh, I don't understand what's going on here. And I would just sit there in like abject, fury and frustration that my lawyer was doing nothing about this, having all the information that I just gave you right now. So this is how they achieved the conviction. It was just a crazy story, but never, and it's so important for listeners to understand, they never talked about the murder. There was never a reason why I would have killed this guy. There's never a how or why I would have supposedly killed this guy. And when you're ready, I'll explain to you one of the most important chains, showing that how I couldn't have done this.
Sure. First, I definitely want to also note that lie detector tests were illegal, or excuse me, hypnosis was illegal in 27 states at that time. And the guy had never done it in his life and wasn't licensed to do it.
No.
So it should have been inadmissible from the get-go.
He was completely insane. Yeah, we have long interviews by Thomas Mooney. He was completely insane. Listen, a funny story going back a bit. When the shot was heard, there were 3 people in the parking lot, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier. There were 3 people in the parking lot walking together, Rennie Gobain, Bob Mervich, and Kathy Ballard. Now, here's what's important. Kathy Ballard, just so everyone knows, is one of my defenders now. She never accused me of this crime or of being the killer, and she got a better view than Rennie Gobain got. She did not pick me out from lineups. She did not pick me out at any point, and she has since given interviews with Detective Welser and acknowledged that she absolutely does not believe that I had anything to do with this crime. But she grew up knowing the Mooney family and was friends with the Mooney kids, and she said this guy was a pervert and a freak, and that she thought there was some very strange sex stuff going on in the house. He had been molesting the children. This guy was a wacko, just all the way out there. And again, he was a guy who wanted to be a star. So now we have Kathy Ballard in the parking lot with Rennie Gobain contradicting everything that Rennie said. Now, here's Rennie's story. After he got that sense, that feeling, he claimed that he wrote down the plate number on a piece of paper in his little school composition book. He's walking with Bob Mervich. This is Bob Mervich's testimony. Now, he's a friend of Rennie Gobain. He doesn't know me from Adam, and he testified for me. This is what he said. I never saw Rennie notice anything. He didn't pay any special attention to the car. We didn't think anything of it. He didn't say anything about it later on. He didn't say he thought it was suspicious, and he didn't write anything down in a notebook. Everything Rennie said was a lie. And this guy went on to become a cop, just so everyone knows. And you would think that would have been enough for the jury to go, wow, their only direct witness is an absolute pathological liar. Didn't bat an eye. So, again, you see what's going on here. Kathy is basically saying nothing Rennie Gobain said is true. Bob Mervich, his friend, who testified for us, is saying nothing that Rennie said is true. But they're trying to pin down that 882 DHH plate thing. And again, juries have a responsibility, but I just believe that the juries, and especially back then, they were so influenced by television, they were so influenced by the media. Like I said, they're so much more alert and bright now that they're not buying it now. Back then, they were buying it. This is Robert Clinton. He's a chief prosecutor. This is the word of God right here.
Absolutely. Also, some of the stuff your lawyer, not this lawyer, I want to make it very clear, and this was a bad lawyer.
Thank you. I was thinking that they might be thinking about me.
No.
Yeah. No.
Definitely
I have a wonderful team. We had, just so everyone knows, one of my most dedicated lawyers, John Mayer, was a former judge and prosecutor who took this case pro bono. Every single lawyer who's ever worked in this case, in any way, shape, or form, has done so pro bono. Not a single one has ever asked for a dime, just so everyone knows. So my state lawyers from Sato stayed on longer than they had to. Jonathan Mayer, Richard Lustig, who did the initial habeas for us, the University of Michigan's Innocence Clinic, Keith, who's helping us now, and Solomon Radner, who advocates for me, and all these amazing attorneys. Ryan Shannon, who's battled for my commutation with the governor. Every single lawyer, David Kramer, they have all worked for free because they believe in my innocence. And every one of them put their reputations on the line. They got beat up for it. They got called every name in the book. It's really terrible that all these great people are so abused and still are to this day. And, Keith's another guy who's been a great advocate and a great friend, and visits me here regularly, helps with my civil problems. He's been trying to give me medical care. He's really, really out there fighting for me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So this guy's name was David Dean.
David Michael Dean. Yeah.
He was quite a mess, to say the least. Unfortunately, he was given to you. You're kind of stuck with what they give you. Unfortunately, you apparently had the money to get a private jet, but you couldn't afford a lawyer. So out.
Well, here's the thing. Now, I had several $1,000s to kill a man I never met over a girl that I dumped, 5 months earlier and never called again. But I was living in a $200 a month farmhouse with my girlfriend who was getting food stamps, and I was unemployed. So again, this is the insanity of all of this. I can charter jets, and I don't know where I got the brand new car. So if I could backpedal a little bit, just so the listeners understand, again, I've mentioned this. There was no internet in those days. Phones were very different. There was no cell phones. So to get information back then, like I said, took a lot of effort, a lot of legwork, a lot of time and things. Now, remember, I dumped Crystal in June, and I move up north, and she admitted she never saw me again. I'm not a stalker. I didn't drive by. I didn't call, nothing. I'm living up in the woods in the UP with my pregnant girlfriend and my little friends up there. And, we're hanging out in town, and I'm going to this Taekwondo school, and I'm selling vitamins and supplements. I'm a health nut. I still am to this day. And Scott gets killed. Now, okay, so everyone understands this is a man that I never met. I couldn't have possibly known what he looked like. I couldn't have known what kind of car he drove. I sure as hell couldn't have known he was going to a college or what classes he was taking or when he was going to be there and not be there. I couldn't have known where he worked because this is all after me. I'm gone. This is not a person that I had interaction with and had all this information and then supposedly came back and killed him later on. I'm living in a farmhouse with no money in the middle of nowhere with my girlfriend on welfare. These are 10-hour road trips, which in themselves were insanely expensive in gas and lodging and whatever, to apparently come down and kill this guy I never met over this girl that I didn't care about and that I dumped, and that Tom will admit to this day we got away from because she was stalking me and she was acting crazy. So how could I have known any of this stuff? How could I have known he was going to be at the college that morning? By the way, he was killed skipping class when he was in the parking lot. He was skipping his classes. And he had increasingly bad grades and increased absences according to the records we got prior to his death. So something was going on. His attendance got worse and worse. He was skipping more and more classes, and he was failing those classes. So this is the drugs, obviously. But the person that killed Scott had to know everything about him, had to know what he looked like, what he drove, where he be. Now, Scott lives way out in Croswell, which is a long, long way from this college out in the Hicks. Probably, I think Paula can tell you. Honey, how far is Croswell from Port Huron?
About 35 miles. So
35 miles. Okay. So 35 miles. So you've got a half hour or more each way back then. That's if you're driving 60, which you couldn't do on those roads. So this person that comes to kill Scott, he knows Scott's going to be there that morning, and he's laying in wait, supposedly. And even though Cleland's silly theory was there was a car sitting next to him, the witnesses claim Scott was running to his vehicle away from somebody. Scott was being chased by somebody in that lot. We know that without question because two very credible witnesses who also did not identify me said he appeared to be running and ducking. And he gets to his car and he's shot by the front wheel well of his car, apparently trying to get his keys in the car door. He's trying to get away from someone. He's not shot by somebody sitting in the car waiting next to him. Every witness said no car backed out and took off, and Scott's running to his car, and he's shot by the front of his car trying to get his keys in the door. We know that because the keys were in the door, and his body's laying by the front, left front tire. So again, Cleland knew that he had made that entire story up, and it was to make Rennie Gobain look credible. But the killer knew everything about Scott, and I couldn't have known any of that. And they never made any attempt to explain how I could have known any of this. How could I have known what he looked like? How could I have known what he was driving? His college schedule, or that he even went to college. And these guys were coming to his workplace. They obviously weren't me. I didn't have any friends down there. Tom Ford, Michelle will tell you, I didn't have any buddies in that area. We lived in a cabin. We didn't have any contact with anybody except a guy named John Jock, who was a maintenance guy that we did some work for. We painted some porches and things for the guy. That's it. We didn't have any friends or associations down there. So the guys coming into Scott's workplace, they knew where he worked. They knew he was going to be there. It goes on and on and on. The people that killed Scott knew everything about Scott, and Cleland knew I couldn't have known anything about Scott. And Michelle passed polygraphs indicating everything, including, we never left the UP and came back down. And Tom Ford said we never left the UP and came back down. And Deanna said we never came back down. So what am I doing? Am I making long road trips and I'm stalking this guy and I'm waiting and I'm plotting and I'm gathering all this information and spending thousands of dollars to charter a plane? And lastly, and here's one of the most important parts. For me to commit this crime, let's say I did this with Cleland's theory, I've got to have a pilot who kept his mouth shut for 33 and a half years. And supposedly I did 33 and a half years without telling on anybody. I've been trying to get out since day one, but I haven't snitched anybody out or just given all the information to try to get myself a deal.
Good point.
I have to have the pilot park this plane, this $500,000 Beechcraft Bonanza or better, in a private airfield on frozen ground in a blizzard, because that's what there was that day. And if you look in Michigan, if you guys want to go online and look at the weather in the Port Huron area on May 5th, 1986, at 7 o'clock in the morning, if I recall correctly, it was around 20 below zero, or gusts up to 20 below zero. So now I got this guy waiting, like, hey, wait here. Okay, now how do I get from the plane to the brand new car? So I must have co-conspirators down in this area waiting to bring me this brand new Ford Escort station wagon. Because Cleland's theory was they probably landed the plane in a secret farm field somewhere. So no farmer noticed the plane landing in his field or commenting on it. And now I've asked this guy to land his $500,000 plane in a field with no runway. And for let's say $1,000, he would have told me to F off, I'm sure. And how do I call my co-conspirators? There's no cell phones back then. So I've got to leave the plane and get to a phone. Now, remember, I'm up north at 4 o'clock in the morning still. I've got to leave the plane downstate 512 miles away, get to a phone to get these people to bring me this brand new car and to change my clothes and to get a shotgun, unless I got on a plane with a shotgun. And then I've got to drive to the college to be waiting for Scott for almost an hour, according to their theory, in this brand new car. Then once I commit the murder, I take the brand new car and take it to whoever, because they never found a missing or an abandoned Ford Escort wagon or anything like it. And I've got to take this car and get rid of it or get it back to the people that gave it to me. And then I've got to get back to the plane and tell the pilot, let's go, let's fly now, go. And this guy, I'm sure at some point seeing this in the media, because they were all over the UP and they went to every airport, apparently has kept his mouth shut about the murder he helped facilitate for 33 and a half years. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. That's how insane this whole thing is. So I've kept quiet. Michelle passed polygraphs, but she's really part of the conspiracy. Tom Ford has apparently kept quiet because I must have been planning this right up to the time that Tom and I fell out. Deanna Bomar has apparently kept quiet about the murder, and my co-conspirators with the car have kept quiet about the murder. And I've just done all this time and said nothing and didn't get myself a deal, and I'm just apparently insane. So there you go. Those are the facts.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Going back to your David Dean, your appointed attorney.
Yeah.
He was let's see. Sum it up. You received an inadequate defense at trial.
Yeah.
Defense attorney failed to object to several days of speculative and extremely prejudicial testimony, including outlandish suggestions that you were part of a serial ninja organization based in Japan. Your attorney was also a habitual cocaine user, for which he was later suspended from practicing law in Michigan, and judge ruled him constitutionally inadequate as a defense attorney, never called multiple witnesses. He did not call objections on the prosecution when they literally took throwing stars and axes and weird stuff and put them on display, even though they weren't yours.
That's correct.
They all of their questions were based on 3 ninja movies.
That's correct. Yeah.
You were asked if throwing stars were used to kill children.
That's right.
You were asked if ninja skills and teleportation were a thing, which is
Temujin. It was John Manelli that they asked those questions to, wasn't it, honey?
Yeah, they listen. Just so everyone understands how insane this whole thing was, and I love when people walk into this case and they go, "There's no way that's true," and then they'll come back later and go, "Oh my goodness, it's true." They actually went around to ask witnesses. This is a true story. Everyone is listening now. They asked, "Do you think he can teleport?" Now, this is not a joke. Me, as a human being, could supposedly teleport, and finally, John Manali was, like, I think, the fifth person they did this with. John said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my entire life. If he could teleport, he wouldn't be in your jail right now. What is wrong with you people?"
Yes.
So, yeah, this is what they did. Now, as far as the inflammatory items you talked about, what they did in my trial was they set up a special table right up against the jury box, which is completely illegal. So you go the long way and the jury's on the side. Instead, in my case, we went the long way, and then in front of the jury box, they brought out this giant table, and they covered it, just so everyone knows, this, again, is a matter of record. They brought in guns. Of course, I didn't have any guns, multiple warrantless searches. I had no firearms. I had nothing illegal and nothing that Crystal claimed that I had. So apparently I threw away thousands and thousands of dollars worth of property while on welfare during this surprise search. Anyway, they brought in guns. They brought in all this martial arts equipment, and it was things that I didn't have, or it was things from arts that I wasn't involved in, like they brought in Chinese kung fu blades or whatever. And they brought in some different kinds of throwing stars, and then they arranged all this stuff on the table. But right in front of the jury, now I have a 99.9% white conservative jury from the farm area in the 1980s when they were still trying to ban heavy metal music. They laid out hardcore pornography magazines. And the names of the magazines are very, very graphic. I have them written down. I don't want to say them on the air, but even the titles were incredibly graphic. Now, if anybody loves pornography, that's fine. I'm not making any judgment calls. But back then, that jury, they were not having it. And so I walk in one day and I see this, and of course, I flip out. What is all this? Dean's doing nothing. He's stoned out of his mind. And I finally said, you know what? Either you say something, or I'm going to make a huge scene right now. And I might have said, I'm going to slap you or whatever, in those days, you could assault your lawyer and you would get a new trial. People still try that now. It doesn't work. But some guy in the jail, they knew what was going on. He's like, dude, man, just punch your lawyer in the face. They'll get you a new lawyer. So I didn't do that. Yeah, it's a true story. Yeah, but I didn't do that.
Sure,
but if you guys all go online, if you guys go online, though, there's hundreds of videos of guys punching their lawyers, because that was actually a rule for a long time that it biased the jury. So I didn't do that, but I did become furious, and I was like, this is insane. You do something about this right now. And I was like, Your Honor. So the porno magazines, what they would do is they would play with all this stuff during the trial to distract the jury. So when it's our turn to go, they would take the porno magazines out, and even the covers were hardcore graphic magazines. It wasn't like a hustler. These were hardcore magazines. They would open them up to these spreads of people having, sex, and with orgasm shots, really, graphic stuff. And they would hold it open so the jury could see it. And they would go, oh my God, that's disgusting. They would throw it down like they were sickened by it. And then 5 minutes later, they'd start perusing through the magazines again and then go, oh my God, and they would throw it down again. It was the most disgusting act. This was Robert Cleland doing this with John Bounds. And then they would take the knives and they would play with the knives. And so at one point, Cleland pretended that he cut his finger, oh my God, that's so sharp. I mean, it just went on and on. Finally, when I blow off on Dean, he says, Your Honor, my client's concerned. What's up? This is not his stuff. And this is what they say. Your Honor, we're not saying it's his. We're going to be using this for evidentiary purposes later on. And they did not use it for evidentiary purposes. It just stayed there in front of the jury. Guns, pornography, weapons, recording devices, you name it. The table was covered in it. They must have spent thousands to get all this crap. And they just played with it through the trial. And they took it all away. At the end, when it was time for the jury deliberations, they finally pulled the stuff off the table. By then, the jury had been looking at it for a week. So this is the kind of stuff that Robert... Now, listen, just so everyone knows, this is a federal judge now. This man decides the fates of human beings continuously. And he was a traveling judge at one point, meaning he was in places like Tennessee where they had the death penalty. And this guy was deciding the lives and the deaths of hundreds of American citizens, if not thousands of American citizens. He's famous for ruling for corporations. This man is a monster, and he's out there destroying people's lives, and this is the foundation. This is where he came from. This is what he did before he was a federal judge. And even when his own colleague, who was promoted over him, he was a senior to her, was promoted over him and said what a monster he was, he's still on the bench 10 years later. So that's how bad the system is in this country. It is very, very hard to get these guys off the bench, and they have enormous political power, and they can destroy you, and they can send you to the chair. They can take your life. And Robert Cleland said his one regret was that Michigan didn't have the death penalty. And if they did, just so everyone knows, I'd have been executed a long time ago. because our court system was not going to acknowledge what happened to me, no matter how many lawyers and how many media groups and how many politicians came to my defense. And just so everyone knows, I probably have 100 members of law enforcement on my side. So judges, prosecutors, state and federal agents, county and city. Herb Welser, one of the most amazing people, just a gift from the heavens, who's been defending me for years, was the chief homicide detective for Port Huron. So everyone knows the chief homicide detective for the people that did this to me is one of my most strident and ardent defenders, and has worked for years tirelessly and absolutely for free to prove my innocence. So that's how bad our system is. It's terrifying what they can do to you. And once you are in the gears of the machine, it will chew you up and it will try to digest you, but it does not want to let you go. And if it does let you go, it's like being caught in a pit bull's mouth. You're going to lose something along the way. It's going to tear pieces of you out.
Joy, one of the things is, I don't know if you know the power structure in the universe, but there is the President of the United States. Then on top of the President is God, and then on top of God is the federal judge. Yeah,
there you go. That's exactly how it works, especially here.
It kind of sums up what Kensu's been saying.
Wow.
Yeah, it is
incredible.
terrible.
And the fact of them laying out all of those items is not just egregious because they weren't yours, but egregious because Scott was shot. So they were 100% irrelevant. And I agreed the first time I dug into this case, I was like, wow, West Memphis 3, like it's the same kind of, conceptually it's comparable. After the jury deliberated, it was first deadlock 6-6, then 7-5 guilty, then 8-4 guilty, then 10-12 guilty, and then 12-0. One juror said, "This blows my mind." A juror said, "Your alibi was too perfect."
That's correct. Yeah, because I didn't do it. And so the jurors actually argued that I had too much evidence and too many witnesses. And they never got to hear Beth or Michelle or the real estate agent, who had my name on her blotter, by the way. They never got to hear any of them testify. So they were actually upset that I had too much information proving that I didn't commit the crime. They were upset that I had a time-dated stamped receipt from Kmart's. So, now think, everybody. Remember, I'm way up north. This is not a perfect alibi in the sense that if I had planned this thing, I could have done a much, much better job. There's those 2 or 3 hour gaps they love to play around with, But all these people apparently are part of some vast conspiracy to free me. And they defend me to this day. One of them, Dash Deal, he actually, I don't want to say he had mental health problems, but this case actually broke him. He was a young kid. He really believed in America. He believed in the system. I think he was a very patriotic kid. It was the 80s. And I was very good to these kids up north. I treated them very well. They were friends of mine. They're very nice people. And when I was convicted, Dash testified at my trial, and he went off on Cleland. He said, you're a joke. This is a joke. This is disgusting. He was such a brave kid. When this happened, he went around that town for months, in tears. And he's a tough kid. And he said, "Don't you guys understand what they did to Mickey?" Mickey's my nickname. "Don't you understand what they did to Mickey? We got to get him out. We got to do something. We can't let them do this. He's innocent. We all know he's innocent." They're like, "Yeah, we know. What can we do?" And it messed him up so much. Eventually, he went into the service with the Marines. And I believe he's in Iraq and Afghanistan. And he's a train wreck now. He's a train wreck. He's an absolute train wreck. Between what he saw our government do to me and what he saw when he was in the service, the horrors that he saw there, it just messed him up. And he's been suicidal. He's got severe PTSD. But guess what? He still, to this day, battles for me and fights for me and will talk to anybody that will listen and writes letters, just furious about what happened, because he was with me that day in that town. They skipped class. They knew those kids were skipping. They knew when they were skipping. It was only that day. They knew that I was there with them and that I didn't commit this crime. And none of that mattered to Cleland, because Cleland didn't care about who killed Scott Macklin, because Cleland didn't care about Scott Macklin. Cleland cared about himself, his name and reputation, his buddy Gary, protecting their reputation. So what's better? Put an innocent man in prison and have this wealthy family say, "Oh yeah, this crazy maniac killed our son," or "Our son was shot because he was involved in drugs." And so when we began to say this, remember now, just so everyone remembers, we go back a bit, my original theory was I actually believed Crystal was the murderer. I had a hard time letting that go for the longest. But more and more and more people started to come forward and say Scott Macklin was doing drugs. Scott Macklin was strung out. Herb had a confidential informant years ago who said right before Scott was killed, he saw him at a gas station bathroom. The gas station. And he said Scott looked like he was just a mess. He was a wreck. And this is right before he was murdered. This person doesn't know me and has no reason to lie for me. Since then, we found numerous people that knew Scott. They have no reason to lie for me. I'm not from that area. These guys don't know me. Don Wilkins, many others that saw Scott using drugs. We have a guy, Lenny, I won't say his last name, who sold Scott drugs and gave Scott drugs all before his death. There's no question Scott was using drugs. And a lot of these people knew Crystal Merrill also. A couple said Crystal was using drugs or partying. Some said, no, she just smoked weed. But I had told the police that Crystal was involved in drugs. It's another reason I wanted nothing to do with her. As I said, I'm kind of a health nut. I never used drugs. Shelley, Tom Ford will tell you that again to this day. They've known me since I was a kid. And so Crystal asked about cocaine. I was like, I don't use coke. I don't use drugs. I'm a health nut. I work out. I take vitamins and, so on. And that was another reason I didn't want her around. And when I told the police this, of course, they ignored it. I was the bad guy. When I started saying we're getting information about Scott, maybe having been killed over drugs, I was like the biggest monster that ever lived. I was just so evil. I was so horrible. And now we have upwards of 12 to 15 people, very credible people, all telling us the exact same story about Scott. He was using drugs. His father knew he was using drugs. Crystal obviously knew he was using drugs. He was being stalked, and he was gunned down, likely selling drugs that morning or over a drug-related altercation. And to this day, not one police officer has sat Crystal down and said, you didn't accuse this guy of being a ninja when Scott was first killed. You didn't go, oh, my God, I know who did it. You made those stories up weeks later. And suddenly a year later or half a year later, oh, yeah, that's right. He met Scott once in a parking lot for 3 seconds. They glared at each other. You just keep making up these new stories again and again and again. She claimed that the morning Scott was killed, she was at work, and this woman, we'll call her Lynn, had to come in and substitute for her and fill in her spot. We just found her and we interviewed her, and she said, that's an absolute lie. She flat out said, I never went in to fill in for Crystal. That's not true. And then she stopped and she went, wait a minute. Are you working for Fred Freeman, my birth name? And the minute Herb said, yeah, she hung up on him. But it was too late. It slipped. Another Crystal lie. Crystal claimed she was at work that morning. This girl came in and filled in for her, and we just found out that's a lie. It never happened. So they didn't care about any of this, though. They didn't check anything that Crystal said. They didn't check any of her stories. They didn't check to see if she was at work when Scott was killed. They didn't say, hey, what's up with these shifting stories about this guy? She claimed that she had these marks on her neck from where I choked her or some nonsense like that. But she had told a girl named Heidi Bartell she got a fight at a party, and she got her ass kicked at the party. She then later claimed that I was at a party in the Croswell area. I know nobody from that area. I met nobody there. So guess what we did? We interviewed the people from the party that she identified, and every single one said she was lying. To this day, we just interviewed Teresa McNabb, the main person Crystal said saw me and knew me. She had no idea who I was. She had never met me. She had never told any police officer anything like that, and Crystal was lying. So Crystal's husband gets so pissed about this stuff. But instead of going back and saying, honey, I got a problem here. These witnesses all say you're lying. You know what he does? He calls me names. That's what he does. He calls me names. He went after my fiancé, Paula, and sent her a message like, oh, that's my family you're talking about, and don't believe everything that you read, and he's pure evil, and blah, blah, blah. And Paula, to her credit, this was their family attorney. Paula, to her credit, wrote him back and said, I'm sorry, but this guy's innocent. He didn't do it. If you want to unfriend me, that's fine. So, I mean, that's what we're dealing with. And I love you, baby. Thank you for being so strong.
Paula
Love you too, baby.
I mean, you're just so inspiring and so loving. And I want you to share awesome. How you met Temujin, because you met while he was in prison, and it's like unconventionally romantic.
Yeah.
I know.
You want Paula to tell you?
Yeah, let's hear from her. She's smiling big.
Yeah, she's so sweet. Yeah.
Hopefully you can hear me. Let me know if I break out.
Okay.
So I read an article that was on a Facebook page in December of last year, right after Christmas. And it was about Temujin, spending all this time incarcerated wrongly. And I was just shocked because I knew, I lived in the area. I went to Croslex, the same school that Scott Macklin went to. And I was 11 years old when this happened. And I remember hearing the name and hearing the story about this guy that was tragically killed. And I never knew anything about Temujin or what happened, or that they found somebody, convicted him, whatever. I was 11. I was just outside playing with my friends. And so, but when I read this, I was like, oh my goodness, and I started doing some research, and I was just shocked because I thought, these are my community members that did this to him. And I was just so, I felt so empathetic, and I was like, is he okay? Does he have good people in his life? Like, I was just shocked. I didn't know, it was Christmas time. I was full of the Christmas spirit, and I was just like, this thing happened, and he's all alone, and he lost his wife. He was married for all this time, and he's been grieving her for, 12 years. And
yeah, 8 years. Yeah.
I was just so sad for him. 8 years. And
8 years, yeah.
And I was just so sad for him. And I thought, I'm like, I got to reach out to this guy and like make sure he has good people in his life and that people are fighting for him. And then so I wrote to him and he wrote back, and a kind of a friendship developed right away, and he's very talkative. And
yeah.
We and so, he's a great conversationalist and very intelligent. And we just really hit it off. And then I met him at the prison, and I got a visiting pass and went and visited him. And there were sparks before we even met in person.
Yeah.
I knew I really liked him. But then when we met, it was just like, it kind of sealed the deal, like I was just like, I do like him.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I'm actually, as a funny aside, I happened to be with Kensu the day they first met in person. We were meeting, going over his other matters, and he was like a little kid. He's like, I'm so excited, I'm going to meet her. It was like being with a high school kid. And then I left just as she came in, and it was just a new connection the second that she walked in the door. It's just like when I met my wife, the first kiss, it was all over.
Yeah, yeah. I was alone for a long time, and I've had women write me. I get a lot of attention on my case, and I'm always appreciative and grateful for the friendship. But I wasn't really looking, to fall in love. And I'd been with Amiko for 23 years. She gave everything she had fighting for me. She battled so hard. A very sad part of the story, of course, I lost her to cancer. She was very, very sick at the end. It was a very aggressive cancer, and it metastasized throughout her body. And she would literally slip into these little comas, and she would come back out, and she would get her laptop, and she would start working on my case and sending out emails. That's how dedicated she was. It was unbelievable. So I was absolutely heartbroken. I lost, my friend, my defender, my confidant, my wife, and I never really thought I would find something like that again. And I told everybody, Dave Sanders, anybody that would listen, I'm never going to find anybody that I'm going to feel this way about again. And people are like, no, you'll find somebody. And I'm like, no, it'd have to be somebody so amazing, so incredibly special. It'd have to be that thing where you just know. And so I had lady friends visiting, and lady friends that I corresponded with, and friends with several of my children's mothers. And but that wasn't going to turn into this, even though we had a good rapport and good memories from the past. And when Paula wrote, I'm actually looking at my tablet at her first letter right now. I brought my little device with me, and it begins, "Hi, my name is Paula, and I'm from the Port Huron area, and I just read about your case. It's crazy you were convicted." And so she just went on saying, "You know what? I just want to see if you've got a friend. Do you need somebody?" Now, just so everybody understands, and no disrespect to any woman out there, but Paula is not the kind of girl that writes guys in prison. And there are women that do that, and that's fine, and God bless them. You know, there are women out there that made men's lives in here just wonderful, and they fight for them. And I have enormous respect for that, and for men that do it for women too. But Paula was a more quiet, reserved person. You know, she wasn't and had not been in a serious relationship in a long time. She was not looking for that. She has a full-time job, and she has her quiet little farmhouse, and she has her dog that she loves more than life itself. And so she was very content. And she let me know, I'm very happy with my life. I love my life. You know, there's nothing that I want in this world besides what I've got right now. So she had her faith, and she had her home, and she had her dog, and she had her job, and she was content. But right away, a spark did develop. And it was funny because we were just writing friendly letters, kind of talking about each other, but little things would come up. And I'll never forget, there was we talk about this all the time. She used to say things like, when you get out, what do you want to do, this or that or whatever. And as we got closer, I called her one day, and she said, I'm in a thrift store. I said, oh, okay. And she said, I'm getting you a wallet. And I was like, wait a minute, you're what? She said, I'm buying you a wallet. You need a wallet for when you get out. So she had just decided I was getting out and that she was going to help me, you know. And I was like, well, that's just so sweet. Here's this beautiful girl out there, you know. She doesn't need me. And she's out there thinking about me, and she wants to do all these little things for me. And it was about a week later, you know, we talked quite a bit, and we wrote quite a bit. And personally, I started developing very, very strong feelings for her, but I wasn't really saying that. You know, I wasn't trying to con her or get her under my wing, but I was telling my friends, you know, I was telling Dave from Proven Innocence, I really like this girl. I hope this turns into something. I really like her. She's beautiful, and she's sweet, and she's kind, and she's loving, and she's gentle, and she's caring. And she said, she used to say, when you get out, and then she said, when you come home. And it hit me like a bell in my heart. Bam, when you come home. Because that's the phrase you use if you're coming to me. So she didn't say when you get out, she said when you come home, not when you go home. And I was like, she said come home. And I kind of clarified it. And she said, yeah, when you come home. And she had just decided I was coming home to her. And I was so happy. I was like, I didn't know how to tell her, you know. And but when she walked in the visiting room, Keith's absolutely right. I was just blown away. And I knew I was already in love with her. And it was that thing. It was that one that just almost never happens. And you just know. And we didn't have to talk about it. And I sat her down, and, you know, well, we kissed and we hugged. And I knew, of course, I really knew then, you know, because you just know when you kiss somebody like that, and you just hold them in your arms, and you just feel that this is absolutely right. And she was very nervous. I was nervous. I'm not normally a nervous guy. I'm a big guy in prison. I've been locked up a long time. I'm not by any means easily intimidated. I was terrified. I was terrified she was going to like me, my hair. I didn't know what. I felt like an idiot in prison clothing. And but she was so wonderful, and we just sat there beaming at each other, you know, the whole time. And I think probably about 45 minutes, and I said, I just have to tell you, I'm madly head over heels in love with you, Paula. And I hoped it didn't scare her off. And she stopped. She was, you could tell she wanted to say it, and she was afraid she would feel dumb if she did. And she was like, and she looked at me, and her eyes were just glowing. And she said, you know, I love you too. And I knew, and I just knew that I wanted to be with her forever. And she's been so incredible. She just, you know, just so everyone knows, she took it on herself to start fighting for me before we had any expressions of love. This wasn't like I became her boyfriend and, you know, she became my champion. She became my champion almost from the beginning. She just decided one day, your Facebook sucks. It needs to be completely redone. It's a mess. And on her own, she just got a hold of the girl that helped set it up, and it had not been worked on. So people had posted all kinds of stuff on it. And she just went on there and started rebuilding my Facebook. And the next thing you know, she's contacting innocence organizations, and she's doing all this stuff. And it was incredible. And she just made it her mission. And, you know, made a whole life for us. And so my dream, of course, is to go home to Paula and our little farm and our dog, Hunky, and, you know, start over.
Now, this is how I can tell you how Kensu and I talk quite frequently, but I must say I'm jealous because since Paula has come along, I don't hear from him as much anymore. He calls me.
I don't call anybody. That's true. Yeah, that's true. It's all Paula. Yeah. I get a lot of complaints about that too.
If I want to get to Kensu, I got to get through Paul. She's his receptionist, secretary, social secretary, all right up.
Yep. She does it all for me. She's amazing. And then, of course, the MDOC recently restricted phone calls at some facilities like here. So now she gets all my calls. So with all she has going on and her job and fighting for me, she's also become my personal assistant / secretary. So I'll make it up to her, though.
Absolutely. And she is the reason we are here doing the show. That, as far as law-wise, you have had success as far as people in high positions believing you.
Correct.
However, nothing has physically gotten you out.
Right.
Let's see, in 2010, Chief Judge Hood ruled you should either be freed or have a new trial.
Correct.
Mr. Altman, do you want to address why that didn't happen?
Because, as I said earlier, people cannot accept the concept that they were wrong. One of the things that's overriding, when you look at this whole thing, there's a concept called Occam's razor that you may have heard of, or your viewers may have heard of. And it basically says is that in any situation, the simplest explanation tends to be the right one. The problem is everybody threw out Occam's razor. Everybody has thrown out their ability to be objective because it's what we call confirmation bias. They came up with a conclusion that Kensu did it. And then everything they do is to backfill the concept that Kensu did it. No matter what you do, but it doesn't matter, Kensu did it. And you start to read the evidence. I have a very scientific practice in what I do, and I review a lot of scientific evidence, and there's equipoise and objectivity, and that went out the window. And so that's exactly what you have here. People are incapable of owning up to the fact that they were wrong. I mean, can you imagine the concept of that? I did the wrong things and put an innocent man behind bars for 33 years and be willing to, and being a big enough person to own up to that responsibility. It just doesn't happen. These people just aren't strong enough to do that. They have, they have decided he did it. They doubled down on it. No matter what is said, somebody will find a way to, every time the objectivity is introduced into the process, somebody finds a way to throw the objectivity out the window and go back to, what we've already decided is what happened here. And
and that's really, every administration too.
It's very sad when you look at it, how people stop being, they lose their objectivity. From my perspective, I've been involved with Kensu really over the last 3 years or so. So much of what has gone on predates me by quite a bit, and his battles, and gotten to know him extremely well. And I've been able to take a little bit more of an objective look at it, not being as in the weeds as many of the others have here. And it just doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. It's the old concept of suspension of disbelief. You have to throw away your reason and your common sense in order to accept what was argued here. And I have a really hard time with it, as do a lot of others. And unfortunately, every time you get a judge who sees what's really going on here, you've got a group of people that it keeps coming back to, who are determined to stand behind and double down on what they did, because they just will not. They just will not back down and own up that they didn't do the right thing here.
Right. There's something else too, Joy, that's really important. I have a large number of defenders. We call them our secret defenders. There are people from that area that if you sit them aside and you buy them a drink or you sit down with them at lunch, they'll tell you that guy is absolutely innocent. And I mean high-ranking people, city officials, former chiefs of police, etc. I don't want to name them on the air and get them in trouble, because some of them have already been outed. But these are people way up in the echelon there that will say he's absolutely innocent. And then people will say, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, I'm not going to ruin my reputation for that guy. Now, Herb, chief of police, incredibly respected figure down there. His wife owns a business. He has a large farm. He does an enormous amount of work for the church. Just an amazing human being. He has been vilified, this poor, soft, quiet, gentle little man who solved scores of murders, and nobody ever questioned his integrity or his ability or his findings. And none of his cases were overturned for anything wrong. In fact, they wanted him to lie in cases, and he refused to. But this man has been vilified, and to this day, he's treated like garbage by people that were his friends for 20, 30 or more years because he's helping me. And it's not because they sit him down and go, you know, he did it, and here's the evidence. It's appearance. Well, this looks bad for us. This makes us look bad, Herb. How can you do this? Why are you dredging that back up? Why are you helping that? Why are you talking to people? Why are you interviewing people? It's insane. There have been chiefs of police that have commented on this case publicly and never said I did it, and then privately said there's no question the guy didn't do it. But they're not doing anything about it. They're not fighting openly, because to fight openly in an area like that, and this is a completely controlled county, is to have your life ruined. This is a small town, but it's a very financially powerful town with boating industry and things, Port Huron. And so you're seeing the same people in the restaurants and the social gatherings and the bars and the clubs and so on, the churches, that you're exposing for having been a part of this thing. And so as each new administration comes in, they get briefed on the Freeman story, my birth name. And it's, okay, so here's what's going to happen. The media is going to be calling you, cops, lawyers, prosecutors, they're all going to say he's innocent. We just need you to double down on this thing and don't talk about the case. And so guess what they've done for 33 years? They've refused about 100 media interviews. Usually you can't shut people up like that. They can't wait to give you their side of this. Not happening. They will not talk. They will not discuss the facts of this case because there are nothing they can justify in discussion. They will not talk about the complete lack of evidence. They will attack anybody who defends me, no matter how prestigious their title is. Now, so to give you an example, Jonathan Mayer, incredibly well-respected lawyer. He was a high-ranking member of the Christian Banking Association, a municipal judge, a prosecutor. Just the guy's got an unshakable reputation. What did they start doing? Calling him names. So they couldn't call him a liberal because he was more conservative in his views, because usually they'll just say you're a bunch of hippie liberals or whatever. So with my conservatives, they say, well, they've got an agenda. You got a bone to pick with us, or you must know somebody down here that you don't like, or you're trying to write a book, or you're trying to sell a movie. Now, just so everyone knows, no one's trying to write a book or sell a movie. But they use that quote constantly. They did it at my public hearing in 2010. Every person that came up, well, you just want to get a book or a movie deal out of this. You know why? Because everybody thinks this is a book and a movie deal because the story's that bad. So Dave Moran, who's arguing from the U.S. Supreme Court, premier lawyer at University of Michigan's law school, was told he wanted to write a book and get a movie deal. Dave Moran has never done anything to get a book or a movie deal or to sell any aspect of my story. So if you're liberal, then you're some liberal, hippie, nut job, progressive, wacko, and if you're a conservative, you got a bone to pick and you've got an agenda and you're doing this to get back at somebody or whatever. It doesn't matter who the person was. I have FBI agents that defend me. The assistant chief special agent here in Michigan, second highest ranking position at that time, Hank Glaspie, a defender. William Proctor, who was an ABC News reporter for years, a former law enforcement officer with an incredibly distinguished career. He was told he had an agenda. Now, when he started this case, he met me at this facility, and I sat down with him, and he didn't believe a word I had to say. He was not happy that he was given the assignment to come and see me here, and he brought 2 notepads, and I said, this is going to take a long time to tell this story, and just a few feet away from where I'm at right now, we're in the prison visiting room, and he said, okay, well, you've got 6 hours, tell me your story. And it took the whole 6 hours, because I have a lot to talk about, obviously, and there's so many facts of the case. And he just sat there taking notes, looking at me going, ninjas, right, poison darts, okay, death dogs, got it, yeah, Rambo, okay, teleportation, okay, and just, he went down this list. So I know he thought I was either insane or a carnival barker or something. When it was done, he's a very quiet man, he's very reserved in his speech, and he said, okay, well, I've got everything here, and let's just go over the list real quick. And he starts going on the list, going, ninjas, right, death dogs, poison darts. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but you just got to trust me. So he left here, and he eventually went down to St. Clair County, and they said, we already know who you are, and this is what they said to him, quote, to his face, you're not seeing the files. And he's like, wait a minute, I'm a reporter with ABC, and that's public information. And he goes, yeah, you're not seeing the files. That's a true story, and Bill will confirm this to this day. And he met with a lieutenant at that time, Lieutenant Amo, who became Captain Amo, who kept a log, a journal. And Herb Welser interviewed this man. And there were orders there, which this man logged, that nobody was to see the files on my case. The public was not to see the files in this case. Reporters, I had private investigators go down there. And just so everyone knows, every private investigator's worked for free, too. all of them to this day. They would go down there and say, I want to see the files, and they were told, you're not seeing jack. You're not getting anything. Herb, the chief homicide detective, was barred from seeing the evidence for, I want to say, at least 2 or 3 years. And eventually, he went to the chief of police and said, I want to see the files in this case. I want to see the evidence. And he was able to get my wife, Amiko, down into the basement, and guess what was down there? All the stuff they hid from us that we never saw at the trial. Scott's bloody clothes and vials of blood and the fake photographs and the fake photo board, all the stuff they said they didn't have for 24 years was down there. And we got photographs of it, and we confronted them with it. And that was probably the 4th or 5th administration to try and keep me in here from the time of my wrongful incarceration. So again, that word conspiracy gets bandied around a lot, but you're talking about administration after administration agreeing as a team to protect Robert Cleland and what they did. And so for 24 years, there is no evidence, there are no files, there are no records, or they would come back and make up stories about why we couldn't see them. So remember, I'm the defendant in this case, and I was told I could not see the evidence in my own case. I could not see the files or reports. I could not see autopsy photos. I couldn't see the clothing, the crime scene pictures. I couldn't see anything for 24 years. And this is a matter of record. This is not just me saying this. And when we took this through the appellate process, they said, so what? So what? So in a case with absolutely no evidence, my being denied all the actual evidence, which, by the way, none of it pointed to me. There's a shot shell box with fingerprints that aren't mine. It goes on and on. We were told, so what? All the way to the federal system. So for everyone listening, imagine if this was a death penalty state, and this was done to your son or to you or to your brother, your sister, your father, your mother, your daughter, whoever it might be, your best friend. They would execute you or that person with no remorse and never bat an eye, because I was sent here to die. And I have progressive diseases that are disabling and will eventually be fatal, like immune disease. And they don't care. They're not going to admit what they did, and they're not going to explain to the media, and they're not going to answer any questions. And they're just going to say, he did it, he's a ninja, mind control, teleportation, whatever crazy thing. But they will not discuss the facts of this case, and they will never debate me on the air. I've challenged them 100 times. I've offered to give money to charities to get these people to speak or to take polygraphs. I've put posts out after I won a lawsuit to pay thousands of dollars to charities of their choice if they would take polygraphs, and they won't even do that, including Crystal. So that's how bad this thing really is.
Oh, I would love to start a polygraph. That would be amazing. I have a feeling that would definitely work to your advantage.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
You have you in 2018 you asked Governor Rick Snyder for a pardon, and then now Governor Gretchen Whitmer has the ability to do it. What's the status on that?
I'm sorry, you guys are breaking up really bad there. Are you asking about the process itself, how it works?
No, what's the status?
Oh, the status. Well, just so everyone understands, I think Governor Whitmer's administration has been the best because they're the first ones to even speak to us. Previous administrations wouldn't even talk to us. We couldn't get a phone call in. And this is the first time where staff from the governor's office have answered emails or answered correspondence or acknowledged receiving things about the case. But it's at this point it's very hush-hush. It's not like they sit down and have lunch with us or anything like that, which would be wonderful. Under the present process in Michigan, there are 3 things that can be done: a commutation, a pardon, or a reprieve. And legally, they're all called clemency. We've asked for clemency. A commutation in Michigan is to turn my life sentence, which is a death sentence, into a number of years on parole. Obviously, we don't want that for a lot of reasons. I've been a very successful litigator in the MDOC, and this parole board hates my guts, as have previous administrations' parole boards. Now, it's not because I'm a bad prisoner. I have the lowest security rating I can possibly have. I have what is known as minus 33 points. I'm a 2-1, the lowest level I can go to because of my sentence. I would be out in the camp system, if I didn't have life. So it's not my conduct or anything like that. But I have litigated and advocated for prisoners on every possible issue you can imagine: sexual orientation discrimination, racial discrimination, religious persecution discrimination, free speech violations. I've fought for families on visiting, abuses of prisoners, denials of medical care, and I've won some of those things for myself also. That infuriates the system, and it infuriates those outside the system. Now I'm a bad guy, even though I'm winning these cases, and it's very hard to win these cases as a prisoner, that infuriates a lot of people. So actually, when I had my parole board hearing, they literally said, well, you're filing all these lawsuits and grievances. And I was like, you're not even allowed to mention that legally. Oh, well, we're not saying that's the reason. And then right in the parole denial, it says writes lots of grievances. So, which is not true, by the way. I haven't written a grievance in, I think, at least 2 years. I don't write them unless I have to. But regardless, Governor Whitmer's administration is a very different administration, as is our Attorney General, Dana Nessel, who's been amazing. She established an innocence unit here in Michigan, which we needed forever. My case was the fulcrum for this 15 years ago, when Michigan was going to have an innocence commission, and subsequent governors refused to do that, and so did our attorney generals. But Dana came in, and right away she got to work on a conviction integrity unit. And of course, Michigan had already established one in Wayne County, which Wayne County did on their own, just the Detroit area for listeners. And but our attorney general said, no, we need a state one. We need a state one that covers every county. It's great Wayne County has theirs, but that's just Wayne County. And so she did it right away, and my case is in front of them. Now, what they would do, is they would assign investigators, which they have done, and those investigators would basically have police powers. So for the first time in 33 and a half years, somebody can sit Crystal Merrill down and go, hey, what about blank, 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 and blank? And who are these guys that were stalking Scott? And you were supposed to marry this guy. You would have known all these bad things he was going through. And they can confront Scott's parents and say, it's funny that you told the police that you didn't know a thing about this guy and that Scott wasn't having problems with anybody. And now it turns out from these police reports, he was having all kinds of problems. And but as far as the governor goes, clemency works with commutation, which is the parole process, which has to be approved by the parole board after a public hearing. The next step is a reprieve, which is where they modify your sentence, and that's never really done in Michigan. And the third option is a pardon, and that's what we're hoping for. But of course, the problem with the pardon is the very term denotes you were guilty and we forgive you. And it doesn't necessarily mean that legally, but to the average person, to pardon somebody is to forgive them for something. But what we've asked her to do is clemency and a pardon. Now, Michigan's parole board has consistently said they will not consider the issue of innocence. And Michigan is one of those states where you serve way, way more time than most states. According to the National Justice Institute, the average for the crime that I'm in here for is about 12.3 years. So I have triple the national average, and I'm the most minimum security prisoner that I can be. The torture and the murder and the specific physical abuse acts and additional sexual crimes, and if you opposite requirements for a first-degree murder charge, you get natural life in Michigan, and you are sentenced to die with absolutely no evidence that you plan to kill anybody. It's a really, really bad standard. So I've served triple the national average, even if I were guilty of this crime. Now, here's why this matters to, I hope, to listeners. My lawyer was David Dean. I'm accused of a shotgun killing, a single shot, supposedly, with this weapon in broad daylight, where 20 people in this parking lot, and then nobody saw the crime happen. A friend of mine, and he's a friend of mine now, Randy Overton, was accused of a shotgun killing right after me in Port Huron. His lawyer was David Dean. The assistant on that case was Jan Barnum, the same assistant that was on my case. Randy Overton had his case reversed because Dave Dean was a drug addict at the exact same time as my case. So they file appeals and say Dave Dean was a drug addict and didn't do a very good job. Jan Barnum comes in and testifies and says Dave Dean was at his absolute worst in January of 1987. Just so everyone knows, that's my trial preparation period. So she testified in St. Clair County he was at his worst while he was getting ready for my trial. They refused to do anything for me when I was absolutely innocent. Randy Overton killed this man in front of witnesses, I believe his wife and kid, if I recall correctly, and was also engaged in other felonies during the commission of that crime when he shot this guy with a shotgun. So what's the difference in me and Randy Overton? Well, there's no evidence I had anything to do with this crime. My record is a bad check charge. Randy Overton has a felony record, drugs, and kills the guy in front of witnesses. I'm fighting to argue my innocence consistently. Randy immediately admits that he shot this guy, just like I didn't mean to do it, and I was under the influence of illegal substances. So what do they do to Randy Overton? They take him back, and they give him a sentencing deal on the spot. He's been out of prison now for between 12 and 15 years. He's also one of my defenders. His mother was kind enough to give us the entire investigative file on David Dean, which is how we found out that St. Clair County knew my lawyer had a drug conviction in 1985, a year before I was arrested for this crime. He was caught snorting cocaine in a park in Put-in-Bay, Ohio, and was on probation for cocaine during my case. Now, I didn't know any of this. He was also a drunk. He was legally forbidden from using drugs, was supposed to have mandatory drug testing, and was forbidden from using alcohol. He owned a bar during my case while he was on his no alcohol probation. It's logged that he came to jail drunk consistently to see his clients, and he was never drug tested. And guess who oversaw his probation? My trial judge, James Corden. So for everybody out there, Randy Overton has 11 aggravating factors, admits he shot the guy with a shotgun. Multiple witnesses, including the guy's wife and kids, saw him do it. He killed the guy right in front of his family. And I'm not attacking Randy because he was kind enough to be honest and to help us. But Randy's been home for a long, long, long time, and I'm still in prison. And so then the question should be to everybody else, even if you think that I did this, why am I still in prison? Why is Randy Overton home? And I don't want Randy back in prison, but why is Randy home? I'll tell you why. Because I was framed for killing the mayor's son, who was a drug dealer, by Robert Cleland. And Randy Overton, as far as they're concerned, killed a nobody. It wasn't anybody that was important to them. They didn't care about that person. They didn't care about that person's family. That's why I'm in prison right now. So even if you're listening and you believe that I'm guilty, that is the fact. Randy Overton's case was overturned because Dave Dean was whacked out on drugs and alcohol during my case. And nobody will rule for me on that except for Judge Hood. So there you have it. Randy's out there, and then he's and the way we found out, by the way, just so everyone knows, I was at this prison. I never seen Randy from Adam, didn't know who he was. A person said, "Hey, you've got a door call." It means somebody wants to see you. I stepped outside of the prison unit, and I was in the level 4 unit, and he was in level 2. And he said, "Hey, are you so-and-so?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Here's who I am. I'm Randy Overton. And I'm in here for killing the guy with a shotgun in Port Huron. And I had David Dean as a lawyer. And when I went back to court, they gave me a sentencing deal. And I heard your name," because he didn't know who I was. He knew about the murder, but he didn't know who I was. And he said, "I heard your name, and I heard them talking about you. And they were in the hallway saying, Freeman's going to find out about this. Freeman's going to come back and find out about this." So the reason that matters is when Amico went to get the files on my case, they claimed they couldn't find them. This is after she fought for a year to see the records in the case. And they finally told her she could look at some of the stuff. This is after Overton, though, so it took her quite a while to see the files. When she finally, it's only part of the files, by the way, just things like the transcripts. And when she went to get them, they were not to be found anywhere. But she knew about Overton, so she said, "I want to see the Overton files." And they had no problem giving her the Overton files immediately. They didn't make her fight for those at all. She signed for those. They went down to records in the basement. They brought them back up, and guess what was with the Overton files? All of my records that she was trying to get, stuffed into Overton's boxes by prosecutor Tim Morris from St. Clair County, the same man also fighting to keep me in here. So again, there's that level of corruption, and this is a matter of record. It's on record at the county. She wrote affidavits about it. And later on, Captain Amo admitted and produced his actual journals from that time period, saying, per Tim Morris, prosecutor, nobody is to see the files in this case. And that includes Freeman's girlfriend. She was my girlfriend at that time, Amico. Or my investigators, or Bill Proctor from ABC, or anybody else for that matter. So again, there's that level of corruption. And each administration simply carries it on. And that's what the present one is doing. Mona Armstrong, Mike Wendling, they're doing the exact same thing to this day, 33 and a half years later.
Wow, that is absolutely incredible. As far as health-wise, I know you touched on a little. We're all very concerned about, what you're dealing with in prison.
I'm sorry, I'm losing you again, Joy. Could you say that again, please?
You're having a lot of medical problems in prison.
Yeah.
You have a brain tumor.
That's correct, yeah.
Congenital heart failure.
That's correct.
Chronic lung disorder. And you got COVID.
Yeah, I actually did. Yeah, Paula was so worried about me that she just went to war. She tweeted, she wrote letters, she made phone calls, and so did many others too, just so you know. But I mean, Paula was the visible face. She was smart enough to know how to get the word out there to people, and so she tweeted and did everything that she could do to get me some help so I wouldn't get COVID. March 27th, I did an interview with NPR with Tracy Samilton, and I warned her that we had no protection. We had no PPE. We had nothing. There were sick guys everywhere. And the MDOC was just letting them all intermingle. And my unit, 5 unit, was the worst. And just so everyone knows, my prison was one of the worst prisons in the nation for COVID. We led the state, and we also led the nation for infections. And the MDOC did nothing about this. So when I reported it to the media, and it was finally getting some coverage, for a month prior, the MDOC had refused to allow us to visit and said, "Oh, there's a flu bug running around." And of course, there was no flu bug. And but we didn't know what COVID was. We weren't really hearing much about that. And they began to lie to the public and say, oh, well, every time there's a flu, we quarantine prisons. Now, as you all know, now I've been locked up almost 34 years. The MDOC has never quarantined a prison for the flu. And I was in Jackson when people were dying from Legionnaire's disease, and they didn't quarantine Jackson. This is how much they will lie about this. But these lies were killing people. And so the media wanted to speak to me, and I spoke to Tracy, as I said, on the 27th of March, and the MDOC came out and pretty much called me a liar and said, oh, that what he said isn't true. In the meantime, people were dying around me. They were getting infected around me. They were falling like flies. They kept pulling them out of my unit, mixing prisoners with no protection. They actually made me help sick prisoners in exchange for like access to the telephone to call Paula, help that guy move his property, who's infected with COVID, by the way, and is not wearing any protective gear either. And of course, I have immune disease. So I said, listen, I have immune disease, I have heart disease, I have lung disease. I understand COVID can kill you if you have it. I also have bowel disease, another thing COVID can kill you with. And I said, what are we going to do here? And they said, nothing. And only because NPR came out on Michigan Public Radio and did my story, did the MDOC finally 2 days later give us these crappy little cotton face masks. No gloves, no body gear, the aprons, none of the things they claimed that we had were available. They lied and told the public we had sanitizer and we had wipes, and we had none of that. They had taken bleach from us years ago, so we couldn't even clean our cells or our restroom areas or our cooking areas appropriately. And again, called me a liar. So I said, well, here's all you got to do. There's video cameras in all the units. Order the video of the days that I was talking to you and telling you this, and you're going to see we're all walking around with no masks and there's no cleaning going on or anything. And guess what? Suddenly it was like, oh, no, we're doing all this stuff. But they weren't. They still weren't. And we were all still mixing together. And people were getting sick. And Paula became very upset. And so she tweeted and she called and she wrote letters, and Dave Sanders wrote letters and others wrote letters and said, move him, do something. And they refused to do anything. And I developed COVID. I became incredibly ill. And what they were doing in Michigan was they were punishing you if you reported that you were sick. So this is what they would do. I'm in a cell, and I have a television and a radio and a little MP3 player and, typewriter, whatever you have as property, clothing, books, things like that. So you have something to do. They were taking the guys that were reporting that they were sick, and they were stripping them of all their possessions and then just putting them into a cell. So the punishment, and it was a punishment, for reporting that you were sick was you were not going to receive any care because they weren't giving us a remdesivir or hydroxychloroquine, or they weren't giving us anything. They were simply locking you in a cell with nothing. And then you couldn't use the email system, which is how we communicate. You couldn't use the phone. You'd get a shower every 3 days instead of every day. It was like being in segregation, like you had done something wrong. In fact, you were treated better in segregation than if you said you had COVID. So being very, very ill, if you guys look online, you'll see quite a few prisoners in Michigan, they literally voluntarily died in their cell because they didn't want to die in an empty cell with nothing, so they didn't report that they were sick. Now, as we all know, if you get very, very sick from COVID, especially in prison, and you're not getting any care, putting you in an empty cell is not going to get you any better. So they made the horrible choice to at least die with their stuff and able to call their families until they died. It's insane, and it's so immoral. And nothing's been done about it. I mean, there's some litigation pending that's going to drag on for years. So I became ill, and I tried to mask that I was ill because I knew what they were going to do to me. And Paula, she called me out a couple of times. I was coughing and gagging on the phone, and she'd be like, honey, are you okay? I'm like, oh, no, I'm fine, babe. My allergies are acting up, knowing that they're listening to the calls. When the word finally leaked out that I was sick, by then I had the antibodies. And I had been tested by the National Guard, who came in and tested us in Michigan, and I had the antibodies. But the MDOC was furious. They were so mad that I had busted them. I had been in the Free Press and the Detroit News, and I'd been on the air, and they were smoking mad. So Paula had tweeted some stuff, and we had discussed some things in JPay and on the phone, and so they decided they were going to get me. And I was given a warning by staff. They're going to come and get you. They're going to say it's because of COVID. They're going to lock you up. And I said, I've already got the antibodies. They can't do that. And they were refusing my breathing treatments on top of that. And if I pressed them for the breathing treatments, they were going to use that as an excuse to lock me up. And I said, you can't say I have COVID now. You can't do that anymore. And they did. They literally did. Even though I had the antibodies and they had not tested me again, the staff came and said, they're going to set you up. They're going to lock you up. I had another interview that day I was supposed to do with NPR. I was supposed to be calling Tracy Samilton from NPR back. I went to my counselor and reported I had to call this reporter from the radio station, and within an hour they came and got me. And they locked me up, and they said it's because of COVID, and they literally put me on lockdown again. So Paula just raised hell, and Dave Sanders raised hell, and they tweeted about it, and Phil Mandelbaum from Herald News came in and started helping us, and they just made noise that they're punishing this guy, they're retaliating against him, they don't want him talking to the media, and guess what? 4 days later, they decided I wasn't a threat, and they let me back out of the hole, took me off of lockdown. But this is what they do to you, you know? And it's just so everyone understands, if you don't have anybody fighting it for you out there, and you're in here, they can kill you, they can take your life, they can brutalize you, and what are you going to do? Once you're locked in that cell and those steel doors clang shut, they hold your fate in their hands. And I'm just blessed that Paula came into my life and fought for me so brutally and so viciously. She's a warrior. And, you know, Dave Sanders relentlessly for 15, 20 years. And my adopted dad, Mike Mongan, they were out there making noise and battling. And they're the reason I'm alive to this day, is people like that. So people should care what goes on in here, because even if you don't care about prisoners and you think we all belong in here, you know, studies show that 90% of Americans have at least 4 steps away from them a loved one who's in a correctional facility. So a minimum, at least 4 steps. Sometimes it's a direct family member. And once you're in here, they can do whatever they want with you, and they have. And Michigan has killed quite a few. You know, we had the Souders case in Michigan where they literally dehydrated a guy in his cell. They wouldn't give him any water. And he begged and he pleaded and he died in his cell. And Dan Manville handled that case. And Pat Caruso laughed about it. Our former director laughed about it on national television. Oh, well, things happen. She thought it was hilarious that they murdered this guy. And I think they murdered 2 that year in the same way. And COVID, they murdered a lot of prisoners, including a good friend of mine, Frank Cologne, because they didn't treat these guys. And when it was too late, they just threw them into an empty cell, and they stopped by and they checked their pulse and their temperature, and they let them die. So, you know, we weren't going on respirators. We weren't getting trial drugs. We were just dying. And that's what, you know, we were afraid was going to happen to me. And fortunately, by the grace of God in the universe, I'm still here. So, which I'm sure really ticked off St. Clair County, because, you know, we joke later on that once they publicly knew I had COVID, they were probably down there cracking champagne bottles. So that's it. It's over. No more media. No more intrusions.
Sorry, asshole, still here.
Yep. Sorry, still here. Yep. That's smoking.
Do you?
The warrior. I just think Temujin's the warrior.
Yeah, I've been fighting for a long time, and she's my baby. She's my little warrior. I call her my warriorette, my Kensuette. She's my little warrior princess. Yeah, she's been awesome. You have to listen. You just so everyone knows, you have to know Paula. You know, she completely transformed in 6 months from this person who, you know, like I said, she had a life and a career, and she's a very good, caring person. It's obvious from when she wrote me that she didn't even know who I was, and she was worried that I just had, you know, friends or somebody to help me in some way. So she had an enormous heart, but she'd never done anything like this. You know, she was not the kind of person to go out. She's a very quiet, private person. You know, she wasn't a Twitter person, nothing like that. You know, she liked to go home and read books at night after work. You know, she would work in the Detroit area, stay down there in that area, come back up, go to her little farm and just retreat, and that was it. So she was not this person she became. But when she decided that she was going to take up this cause, even before there was a discussion of us being together, she completely committed to it. She researched it. She found all these groups and organizations. She didn't know what she was doing, you know, and I wasn't like, hey, do this for me. I just called and she'd be like, oh, I'm doing this for you. And I'm like, that's amazing. And, you know, now I can give her ideas or suggestions, but 90% of what's been going on is her. And a lot of this media coverage has been her. And God bless you guys there. You're there now because she got a hold of other people that helped get the story out there too. So she complained, she became like a butterfly, you know, just a totally new person. And now she's like me. She's a social justice warrior, and she's fighting and she's studying and she's researching and she's learning. And it's an amazing thing to watch. And just so everyone understands, people always ask, you know, how are you so upbeat? How do you keep going? I've had so many friends, you know, die in here and take their lives. And I've seen horrible depression. I've got so many friends that are on psychotropic medications now, and the mental health problems are horrible in Michigan. Half my unit's on medications. And the way I kept going is people like this would come into my life. So, you know, Amiko, of course, was the first person to believe me, and that was way back in like 1990. And then she brought in this private investigator who was just amazing, and he thought I was full of it. And he came to see me, And we spoke for 4 hours with her on the visit there. And he walked out the parking lot, and the only person ever been paid was Al. He got $500 as a down payment. He turned to her and he gave her the $500 back and said, "I'm not taking your money, lady." And she thought he was going to say, "Because I'm not going to help you." And he said, "Because I'm not going to charge you. That guy didn't do this." And so then, Al became a big part of this, and he became my defender. And he helped get Philip Joplin to confess about the secret deal with my trial judge and Robert Cleland and the police and everything. And so people like that kept me going. And then I would get down and be defeated by the courts, and they would just write these ridiculous rulings, or they would just say, "We're not even going to look at your claims." And we'd get a little despondent, and then more amazing people would come in. Bill Proctor came here, as I said, from ABC, and he was, absolutely skeptical. And he came to see me 2 weeks later back at this prison. He said, "You know what? There are people down there that told me you didn't do this." And I said, "Well, why don't you help the guy?" "Well, I'm not throwing my career away for that guy. I don't know him from Adam." And he said, "You didn't do this." I'm like, "No, I didn't." He even told the warden here, Jimmy Stiegel, he said, "He's innocent. He didn't do this." And they're like, "Really? He's not just a con man?" "No, this guy didn't do this." And by then, Bill had talked to multiple alibi witnesses and said, "No, he was up here with us. He didn't do it." And so again, we'd lose, and then more great people would come on. And just like you right now, podcasts are new for me. This is my second one. And what an amazing forum for so many great people out there to hear what's going on. I hope to be moved by it. And even if you don't care about me, just care about the issue, because the issue is so important. There are tens of thousands of innocent people in our nation's prisons. And I don't know how many have died who shouldn't have been in here, but everyone should remember that most don't get the death penalty. Most get numbers. And so they're innocent and nobody helped them. They fought as best as they could fight, or they had nobody to help them fight, and then they died in here. And, fortunately, some made it home. Some were innocent and did time and went home. But a lot of them died in here. And that should matter. And the way that they orchestrate these convictions should matter. And the stuff they get away with should matter. And this national movement we're seeing right now for things like police reform, is so important because they have so much power. One cop, just one cop. And I have some amazing law enforcement on my side, and I know that's not going to make everybody happy, but there are some that have really fought for me. But a bad cop did this, a bad judge did this, a bad prosecutor did this. Any one of those one people can destroy your life or send you off to die. And they shouldn't have that kind of power. There should be some overview. There should be somebody watching this stuff. And our appellate courts are the ones that are supposed to do that. And in America, your odds of getting overturned are about 0.1%. So if you people all believe that only 5 people out of 50,000 had any violations during their case, you're sadly mistaken. They do this to people all the time. Not as bad as they did it to me, but they really wanted me, and they really wanted to frame somebody for this. And they have fought very, very hard to keep me in here. But they do it all behind the scenes because they won't do it publicly. But yeah, they can destroy your life, and they can kill you. They can take your family from you. They can ruin you. I lost everything. I lost my children, my home, my career, everything. And I'm so blessed to have Paula now. But I'm 57 years old with terminal diseases and insanely painful progressive conditions that I'm receiving no treatment for whatsoever. And they could care less. This is what they can do to you in this country. So when I hear America's the freest nation in the world, it infuriates me. Because this isn't going on in Finland, in Denmark, in Norway, in Sweden. And I can go on down the list of countries that are far more progressive than us, that have a much, much better justice system. This isn't going on in Canada. In America, when DNA came out,
recidivism rate is like non-existent.
Exactly. And not only that, their wrongful conviction rate is non-existent. I think he's got like 11 stages of appeals in Canada. But more importantly, this is not how they work in Canada. Canada doesn't do this. The system in America is not just corrupt in Michigan, it's corrupt throughout the country. And I know that's going to tick off a lot of people that are still in the system, but it's still true. Every time you see somebody get out on a DNA case, that's a guy who went through a score of appeals, and it was the DNA that cleared him. The appellate courts didn't let him go. They didn't acknowledge what was done to this innocent person. It was the science they couldn't refute that made them let that person go. And what do these prosecutors do every single time? Well, that doesn't mean he's innocent. He probably had a co-conspirator we don't know about. If it's a rape murder and there are witnesses and the DNA clears the guy, they'll come back and say, well, okay, he didn't rape her. He just killed her. He must have a partner we don't know about. Well, everybody said it was only one person. Well, but okay, now we know he's got a partner we don't know about. They will not admit what they did. When they were doing the documentary on my case in 2005, they were down in Port Huron, and Joe Viola, the producer, who was working with HBO Playtone at that time to do this, went and talked to some city officials in Port Huron who agreed to speak to him off the record. And two very, very high-ranking people in the city over the prosecutor's office said to Joe, quote, everybody knows this guy's innocent, but this is going to bankrupt the city. And the second person chimed in and said, we've been saying for years, you need to just let this guy go and give him a check. That's all they care about. And when the prosecutor's office came out again and refused to talk about the case, their comments were, this is going to bankrupt the city. All they care about is what they would have to pay me in a wrongful conviction lawsuit if I was free. That's their only concern. They don't care about Scott. They don't care about the murder. They don't care about Scott's son, Brandon, who grew up not knowing his father with his father's killer still free. They don't care about Scott's parents. They don't care about anybody but themselves and their reputations. They sure don't care about me or Paula or all the amazing people that defend me. And even though I have judges and prosecutors and law enforcement defending me, they don't care. They can't talk down 100 cops and judges and prosecutors. So they'll just say, well, yeah, he did it. We're convinced he does it. We got the right man. That's it. So America, who's got more credibility? The 100 from the judiciary and the courts and the law enforcement system that defend me, the experts that defend me, the elected officials that defend me, or the one or two people in that office that want to keep me in prison. They won't talk about the case. And this is just so people understand why we need these reforms. These reforms are so important. And the reform word that's never said, I think, needs to be said also. It's got to be police reform. It's got to be criminal justice, social justice, and it's got to be appellate reform. Because our appellate system is a joke. It's a tragic joke. And so the reason this didn't happen in Canada when DNA came out and you didn't have thousands of people getting cleared is because Canada's system is not anywhere near as bad as our system. And yet I'm listening to Fox News yesterday while they're chiming in, we're the freest country in the world. And you know what? America's a lot more free than some countries, but we are not the freest country in the world, and we do not have the best system in the world. And once you're in prisons in America, we have some of the most brutal, violent prisons on this planet. And you will get raped in here and murdered in here. You will get butchered in here. You will get dragged into a gang. You'll be forced to do horrible things to people to stay alive, or you'll have horrible things done to you because we do nothing to fix this prison system. And millions are brutalized in this system because not everybody is a martial arts expert and 6 foot tall and 250 pounds of muscle or ex-military or whatever. So when the innocent come in here and they're not big and they're not strong and they can't defend themselves, guess what happens to them? They get rented out, they get raped, they get robbed, they get brutalized. And if they're wrongfully convicted of a sex crime or a rape sex crime, murder sex crime kind of thing, or something on a child, maybe a child murder, or like what happened to West Memphis 3, America, what do you think happens to those guys in prison? So we need massive reforms. And the racial disparity, of course, is still just a huge, huge issue in America. And there's no programs to help these guys when they get in here. They're just thrown to the wolves. So they join gangs for safety and security, and then gang life makes them miserable. And life is destroyed. Life is gone. It's over. It's through. For the most part, 99% of these guys, they're never redeemed because nobody's trying to redeem them. It's a horrible system. Excuse me.
Wow, that's
sorry.
Just incredible. What are you about this happening to you? Is it an hourly emotion? Are you mad? Are you sad? Are you indifferent? What are your days like? Where you're feeling?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm losing you again there. I'm getting the warble. Okay. Did you ask about my daily life?
I can't hear her either, Temujin. Just a second.
Yeah, I just lost him.
Are you there, Joy? We can't hear you.
Yeah, it's breaking up really bad.
No, I can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Joy, is that you? Okay, there we go. Nice
Okay.
and clear. Beautiful. Okay, I'm sorry. Could you ask the question again, please?
Yeah, sure. Emotionally, what is your day like? Do you have, different kinds of emotions? Like, are you pissed off? Are you, why the hell am I here? Why haven't I been let out? Or this sucks and I'm never getting out. Like,
He's more positive than me. He's way more positive than I am. I call him and he cheers me up. I don't know how.
Yeah.
Well, he does it, but
Yeah, if we're going to be listening, if we're going to be brutally honest, I'm not a depression person per se, but well, let's go back a bit. When I got locked up, I guess I kind of believed in the system, like most people back then, especially. You'd see a movie about some innocent guy, like that Tom Selleck movie or whatever. But generally, you believed if a person was in prison, he probably belonged there. And I had screwed up on the bad check thing, and actually Washington State treated me pretty well. They're pretty fair with me. And they weren't abusive. They treated me fine in the jail. They didn't treat me like garbage in court. I had a great lawyer. They put me on probation. They didn't want to ruin my life. Washington State, even back then, was much more progressive than, let's say, Michigan. So when this happened, I absolutely believed I was going to be instantly exonerated and vindicated. I mean, I was just sure. As more and more people came forward saying he was in town with us that day, and it would filter back, hey, they just found Dash Dealey. He said you were in town. Shelley helped back then, my son's mother, and at that time, of course, my girlfriend and my principal alibi witness. She was getting a hold of people, too, and saying, do you remember anything? They're saying this, they're saying that. So little things would pop up, and my hope would come back up, and I was sure the lawyer was going to, come back and tell me, yeah, they're letting you go today. Plus, Dave Dean, just so everyone knows, and again, this is a matter of record. I'm not just saying this. I have all the documents and everything. He was stealing everything from my storage bins and selling it for crack cocaine. The whole time telling me that I was going home any day and I was going to have this giant lawsuit for malicious prosecution and my name was going to be cleared and the papers were going to extol my virtues and so on. So you cling to hope. When you have no hope, you cling to hope. By this time, they had started the abuses in the jail to break me. So they would send Dean over with these sentencing deals. 15 to 25. No. Put him in the hole. They put me in L cell. In the hole with a steel screen welded over the bars with no human contact. They would turn off the water. They wouldn't let me shower, wouldn't let me shave, no hygiene products. They would starve me. I lost over 35 pounds. I was 160 pounds when I got out of that jail. And I was a really muscular fit, anywhere from 195 to 200 when I got locked up. And they wouldn't let me have any books, nothing to read, no human contact, no phone calls, no visits, nothing, to try and break me. And, but when I would see Dean for a couple of seconds in court, oh, don't worry, this is all going to blah, blah, blah. Little do I know, he was part of the setup from the beginning. He had begun to steal my things within a month of my being in the jail. He actually forged power of attorneys and wrote letters to a friend of his named Gary Knopf, giving him instructions on what to steal from my storage bins. Look for this, look for this. Look. I have his handwritten notes. Look for musical equipment. Get his guitar and amplifier. Get his bow hunting equipment, and so on. Anything I had of value. So the fix was in from the very beginning. But I believed that it was going to be corrected. When the trial began, that was, I think, the first time I really said, they're really doing this. By then, a lot of phony reports had come in, and they were making things up, and, there were the crazy crystal stories, but I was like, still, there's so many alibi witnesses. You guys have to know I didn't do this. And I thought locally, they're going to find the guy that shot this guy, or they're going to prove that Crystal did. They must be investigating. I didn't know they did no investigation. I thought they were out there investigating the whole time. Once they decided I was in on day one, there was no investigation whatsoever. They didn't question anybody about Scott's murder. They only questioned people they thought they could tie me to the crime in some way. They'd go to people and say, have you seen this guy? Not what do you know about Scott? So they were trying to frame me all along. And but when the trial started and they began to do all the horrible things that they were doing, I realized this is really happening. And then I thought for sure the jury's going to see through this. Come on, teleportation, ninjas. A funny short note, a pit bull killed a child. Well, it's not funny, it's tragic, but the funny part's the tragedy for me too, is that a pit bull killed a child in town before my trial. It made the national news. The dog, I believe, broke through a door or something like that to get to this kid. I had 2 German Shepherd puppies. I have my AKC papers for the dogs. I have a letter from the Delta County Sheriff's Department, and I have photos of Michelle pregnant with our son holding these puppies, a white and a tan German Shepherd. And the documentation says they're German Shepherds, got their names on there and everything. The dogs lived in Port Huron with Shelley when I got arrested and we moved back down there. Or she moved back down there to that area. And so guess what they told the jury? Oh, he had pit bulls. They began to infer that I had pit bulls. They would say it out loud. They would say it publicly. This is the kind of monsters that you were dealing with. This terrible tragedy, this little child being killed by a pit bull, and America was getting pit bull fever in the 80s. And let's say he had pit bulls too. So I had to come into court and try to prove that my dogs weren't pit bulls. And we get these letters from the county sheriff and the photographs and all this stuff. And they refused to let me introduce any of it. So they'd made the allegations, Now I'm a monster. I've got a baby. I've got a little daughter. What kind of a demon would have pit bulls? It's that this is what they did again and again and again. I'm a health nut, and I'm starting this health food business. So here's what they said they found in my home. Hundreds of bottles of unidentified substances. It was endless thing after, and I would go, seriously? If you guys thought I had drugs, you just test them to give me a bunch of drug charges. So they would just say, we found hundreds of bottles of unidentified substances. You know, or he had an arsenal, but they couldn't identify anything in the arsenal. It never stopped. So I began to lose faith. And of course, my lawyer was doing nothing. After about a week of the trial, I really realized he was part of this. He was actually like looking down when they were doing this stuff. He wasn't even taking any notes. And the notes that he did take, and we have them, just so everyone knows it's part of the appellate record, he was writing funny jokes to himself. Apartment with first strike defense capabilities. This is the 80s during the nuclear fears. And he'd say, law of lethal injection, must dip the needle in alcohol first. These are his actual notes. This is what he was doing during my trial. He was writing these crazy, insane notes to himself about silly jokes he was making up in his mind, probably for the bar or something. That's what he did during my trial. And I have those, I grabbed all those. I actually have those in his handwriting. So then I knew, but then I thought, still, I held out hope. The jury's going to see this. They're going to see this for what it is. They're going to know there's no way I did this. They can't believe all these witnesses are wrong. The alibi, the documentation, my car being broken down, the receipts, checks from the auto parts store for the parts that I bought for the car. They can't believe that's all fake. No one's saying it's fake. Guess what? As you said, you got the votes. So later we learned from the jury that they were torturing the jury. It was now it's a terrible heat wave. We go from freezing cold November to the heat wave in the summer. They locked the jury in a small room with the windows closed. They had to beg for water. I have actual notes where they wrote, "Can we please get some water?" Response, no. This is what they did to my jury. They broke that jury. Then, almost unheard of, they let the jury go home for the weekend. They didn't sequester the jury. They didn't sequester anybody, really. They didn't sequester the jury. Let them go home for the weekend. If you think people weren't talking about the most famous murder in St. Clair County, and if you think farmers and businessmen back then didn't read their newspapers for weeks on end, you know, again, I got a bridge to sell you. So they come back Monday morning, and it's maybe an hour, and boom, guilty. And I see this juror, and she's bawling, she's crying, and I know she must have been the holdout. But how did you watch that trial and have 8 people think I was innocent, and then 6 people think I was innocent, and then 4 think I was innocent, and then 2 and 1 and so on? How is that even possible? The legal standard is reasonable doubt. Do you have any doubts that maybe this didn't happen, that maybe he didn't do this? And they sent me away to die. They didn't send me away for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. They sent me away to die. And one of the jurors said later on, "Oh, well, we didn't know he was going to get natural life." Well, what does that matter? And, of course, Richard Pellegrin, who's in the documentary, said, no, there was no evidence that he did it, but he could have done it. We thought maybe he could have done it. So, you sent me away to die because you thought maybe I could have done it, but there wasn't any evidence that I did it. And bam, you lose faith. And here comes the appellate lawyer, and he's telling you this is the most horrible case we've ever seen. And Sato, for the first time in its 27-year history, writes this thing saying this guy's completely innocent. We never say this. And I'm like, yeah, they're going to fight for me, and I'm going to go home. And bam, 1990 hearings, and now I've got the inmate in court, and I've got this drunk crackhead lawyer of mine in court, and it's going to be over. And then suddenly, Robert Cleland's a judge. My trial judge rules for himself and then protects Cleland, who, he, of course, Cord knew that Dean was a drug addict because he was overseeing Dean's cocaine probation. By then, Dean was under investigation. All the cops in town knew it. He was an undercover snitch for the police. It was over for Dean. And instead of just telling the truth, suddenly Dean changes and starts saying publicly, "I think he did it." At the end of my trial, he didn't think I did it. When I went after him, he thought I did it. And then I knew how really corrupt and wicked the system was. I didn't find out for a year that Dean had stole my stuff. I didn't know this was going on for. It took a year until SureGuard got a hold of me and said, "Your lawyer stole everything," and sent me all the paperwork, including the fake documents that Dean had filed. And then I knew. They gave me this guy. They knew he was a druggie. He was a former prosecutor. They knew he was a cocaine addict. He stole everything that I owned and sold it for drugs in his bar. We found the guys he sold my stuff to, Charles Speckman and Scott McCullough. And Scott McCullough gave us an amazing affidavit about this, described all my property. And then I was like, the system is rigged. And then when the appellate courts denied me, then I knew the system was rigged. But then people would come in and say, "We're going to get you out of here. We're going to do this. You're going home." And that keeps you going. And then Amiko comes into my life, and she just starts fighting for me. And there's Alan Woodside, and there's Bill Proctor, and there's John Mayer and State Trooper John Boggs and Harold Copus of the FBI. And so again and again, amazing people would come in, James McCatron, and say, you know what, I'm not going to stop till you're out of here. I'm going to keep on fighting for you. I'm going to keep on making noise. And it keeps you going. And then I had the ABC specials here in '96, and everybody in this compound, even the warden, said, you're going home. You might as well sell your TV and pack your stuff because you're going home. And we did. We thought I was going home. And Michigan Supreme Court denied me again. Even when their Chief Justice said I was innocent, they denied me again. And then you lose hope. And it's this roller coaster. And then meanwhile, friends are dying all around you. I'm watching people get murdered. I'm watching people get brutally raped, beaten senseless, and having permanent disabilities afterwards. I was present for the murder of a corrections officer, Jack Budd, in 1987. I had friends shot off the fence, killed trying to escape. You see all these horrors in here, and you see young kids just destroyed. And, you start to lose hope again. That it's a hopeless system, and it'll never be fixed. It's too big. They'll never fix it. But you can't do that because that's how they win. If everyone out there keeps saying it's too much, it's too big, I don't have time, I'm too busy, I can't fix this, I'm just one person, it never gets fixed. And what we're seeing right now with the kids nowadays is they're not buying it. They're out there in mass. They're in the streets. They're organizing. They're rallying. They're fighting for the first time in this country's history since the revolution. Americans are saying enough is enough. I'm sick of this. This has got to stop. And that has been an enormous inspiration for me, just like you have been, Joy, because of what you're doing right here. The first thing I heard about you is she is motivated. She cares about this issue. I talked to her, and she's jacked. She believes in this cause, seriously. And I was elated. I was pausing. Oh, this is amazing. Bless her heart. Please tell her, what I had to say before this, of course. And so that's what keeps you going is the people that come in. Paula, I was alone for 8 years. At least I didn't have love in my life. And now look, I have the most amazing woman in the world, and she loves me more than anything, and she's transformed her whole life for me. And people like Keith, they just keep coming in. There's still so many good people out there. And they're fighting the system. They're taking a stance, and they're giving of themselves. That's how we're going to win this, because this is not about me. I'm one victim out of many, many victims. My case is the worst, but many have suffered far more than I have, unfortunately. And as bad as it's been for me, a lot of people died in here for crimes they didn't commit. And a lot of people were, brutalized and raped and sold into sex slavery in here for crimes they didn't commit and so on. So maybe I'm blessed in that regard. And a lot of them are more disabled than I am when they finally got out of here. But still, it's fixable. This is all fixable. And the hope that it's fixable and the revolution that I'm seeing right now, and I know some people don't like that word revolution, but that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a revolution across the country. Our governor and our attorney general have already put out protocols to deal with things like qualified immunity and police misconduct. I mean, that's how fast this is happening in America. And, what a blessing that literally in 6 months, this country has started to turn. It started to turn around, and that's really inspiring. So now I'm just joy all day. I'm happy all day. I'm singing and I'm running around and I'm writing the old lady poems, and we're laughing and giggling like I'm a 10-year-old because I finally have probably the strongest sense of hope that I've had in a long time.
Oh my gosh, I'm so
Listen, these are too long. Feel free to tell me to shut up.
No. your phone off, so I want to get to the kind of towards the end where we can discuss. Well, first I want to explain to the viewers and to you, since you can't see the screen, we've had Gretchen Whitmer's email address and phone number underneath your picture throughout the entire show.
Bless your heart, everybody.
Are encouraging people to call her, and I'm posting this on my Twitter, my Facebook, everywhere.
Thank you. Bless all of you. Yeah,
absolutely. So as far as Keith, what are some of the things we can do to help?
Well, I think that it would be good to contact elected officials, the governor, the attorney general, and say, stop the confirmation bias. Stop just going along with the flow. Take a step back. Take a look at what happened. One of the examples, I use this a lot. I believe it was Michelangelo who said, somebody asked him how he carved David. And he said, I took a block of marble and I chipped away everything that wasn't David.
Yeah.
And if you take a look and you start asking yourself, okay, what didn't happen? What did happen? And you start to try to converge on what happened here. The evidence shows, Kensu just didn't do this. And the more that people become aware of how the system is just broken in that it can blind itself. Justice is supposed to be blind, but you're not supposed to be blind in how you apply the justice. And that's exactly what's going on here. And to continue to see that, on the bigger picture, I help Kensu a lot with many of his civil lawsuits, which are unfortunately necessary to try to get some of the conditions that take place in the prison corrected. For example, they're trying to get the diet fixed because there are problems with the diet that cause the prisoners to suffer greatly. And it's not entitled to lobster and filet mignon, but they are entitled to a diet adequate to sustain their normal health. They don't get that. There's problems with that.
No.
And so we have to keep fighting these things. And one of the things that the MDOC hates with respect to Kensu is that he's very articulate, he's very intelligent. When he complains, he shoots rifle bullets, he shoots a lot of rifle bullets. And they just simply don't like it. But I think the thing that can happen here is that just keep asking, the officials to say, why are you blinding yourself here? What is it about Kensu that you are so threatened about? Why is it that you can't be objective, and that objectivity has disappeared with respect to him? And I think the more that people ask those questions, the more that hopefully people will wake up and say, this just isn't right. It doesn't feel right. There's something wrong here. Occam's razor. It doesn't add up. We have to suspend our common sense, suspend our disbelief in order to accept what happened here. I also happen to be a pilot, and listening to the aviation stuff, it's a joke. The whole thing is just so ridiculous, and that's what people can do here. And hopefully, because he's gone beyond the law. It almost seems like it's a personal. It's a personal battle of trying to save faith. That no matter what the cost, those that control the issue at the top, and I'm not talking the governor, but I'm talking about within the legal system and the courts, is that every time a judge says this isn't right and wants to do something, it gets squashed out. And it's just that these people just simply can't won't own up to the fact they didn't do the right thing here. We're all expected to be reasonable, responsible, and accountable, and own up. And these people, they're not. And that's just
there are some people in the system that have amazing integrity. The problem is that there aren't enough of them. It's like when you look at the cop issue. Let's say that if everybody's seen the movie Serpico, Serpico came into this police department, this amazing movie with Al Pacino from many years ago, and he's like the one clean cop on the force. So he says, I know what you guys are doing. You're on the take. I'm not going to take anything, but I'm not going to tell on you. I'm not going to snitch on my fellow officers. So they try to kill him. They try to murder him. And that sends them on a quest to fight back. But what's really happening is kind of the beginning of Serpico. Too many officers, too many prosecutors, too many judges know about the bad ones, even if they're not the bad ones. So Herb Welser, I don't think that man's ever had a bad bone in his body since the day that he was born. Herb didn't want to see the bad, or Herb wasn't seeing the bad. Herb saw the good in everybody, He had a very religious mindset about his fellow officers. He wasn't in the drug crowd or the bad cop crowd. He wasn't associated with the bad cops. So he came in and did his job very honestly, and he went home. And when I would tell him, these are horrible people, I think he would bristle a bit. These are my fellow officers, even though he concluded that I was innocent. Sadly, even Herb has had to come back and say, this is really wrong. This is really bad. Judge Hood is an amazingly brave person, because she knew what was going to happen when she wrote that opinion. She knew that people were going to be furious that she called out a fellow judge for framing an innocent man for murder, which, as I say again, so everyone knows, this is unheard of. This should have made the national news that week, not because of me, because of what she did and how brave she was to do that. Now, she's not allowed to talk about this case. Judge is not allowed to talk about cases like this, and I understand that, until she's retired and off the bench. But imagine her, this guy's in her court every day. She's right there with him. She wasn't his boss at that time. She became his boss. People thought so much of her, they promoted her over Cleland after she ruled that Cleland was corrupt. So A, why is Cleland still in that court? But imagine the integrity that Judge Hood must have had to go against a colleague and to accuse a colleague in a federal court of framing somebody for murder and saying this man should be let go and ordering that I be released. And the state, of course, immediately appealed that. There are people with integrity in the system. Our present Supreme Court Justice, Bridget McCormick, who again is now not allowed to talk about my case, was one of my attorneys from the University of Michigan. So our Chief Justice believes in my innocence. Our previous Chief Justice believes in my innocence. Here's the problem our governor and our attorney general face. And this has come from many lawyers. Our attorney general has to be in those courts every day. She's Michigan's top lawyer. She's Michigan's top cop. She's brave. I think Dana Nessel is fearless. I don't think she's afraid of anybody. But she still has to be in those courts. How mad is everyone, including Robert Cleland, going to be if her conviction integrity unit says, yeah, this guy's innocent, which everybody expects they're going to do because everybody knows I didn't do this. It's not even a debate anymore in Michigan. It's like a running joke. Oh yeah, the Kensu case, I already know about that. So when our conviction integrity units were established, they put two amazing people in charge of them. Valerie Newman, a champion for justice in the Wayne County unit, and Robin Frankel, a champion for justice who's fought for the innocent in the state unit. And Dana Nessel, another champion for justice. The minute she came in the AG's office, she started fixing things. She's amazing. There's never been an AG like her in Michigan's history. And I'm not saying this because I need her help, because her unit's already investigating my case. I'm saying this because it's absolutely true. She is fearless. She has dealt with the juvenile issues. She's trying to get that fixed. Sex offender registries, everything that was hurting Michigan that she's been able to fix, she started on. And God love her. Our governor, some people don't like our governor, and she gets beat up in the media, but guess what? She's working on police reform, and she's done all this COVID stuff, and she protected renters from landlords kicking them out because they couldn't pay their rent. And now they're fighting to fix our water in Michigan. And so they are taking on very, very important causes. But people don't want me out of here because what you're hearing me do right now, they're afraid I'm going to do when I'm free. That's their fear. They talk about this all the time. Oh my God, when he gets out, he's going to go after the MDOC. He's going to expose the system. He's going to demand Robert Cleland be taken off the bench. They are terrified that I'm going to get out of here and do what I'm doing right now on this podcast. And that, I believe, and a lot of people believe, is the number one reason that I'm still in here. I've been fighting against injustice in here for probably 32 and a half of my 33 and a half years. I spent a year learning the system first, and all day in the law library, and I began helping people. And I've taken up a lot of causes that are not popular. Things like the transgender thing, I mean, that's anathema in here. And there was a kid here who was being horribly abused that I went to the defense of. We'll just call him Wolf, that's his nickname. And there's another guy named Moochie, we'll just call him Moochie, the MDOC knows who he is, who was being brutalized and just horribly abused when I was at the Adrian facility. And I went to war for him, and they made me pay for it. 33 fraudulent misconducts, threw me in segregation, threatened me, tried to kill me. This is what they do. And so people are terrified that I'm going to get out and I'm going to be an advocate. And I don't want to sound too egotistical, but I mean, Keith's right. I can talk. Obviously, anybody listening right now knows that. And I know the subject, and I care about it. So my hope is that our governor and our attorney general will say, you know what? We could use this guy's knowledge. We could use this guy's fire. We could use this guy's desire to see things fixed. And I'm really hoping that will help them make the right decision. That, yeah, you're going to get some blowback from some people that don't want me out. But you know what? Let me help you. Let me help you. Let me offer my advice and my experience, my personal knowledge. You know, I know everything's not going to be fixed in a day. But our governor has hired ex-convicts and put them in positions where they can definitely help prisoners. And I would love to be able to come out of here and do this kind of work for people, to do justice work, criminal justice reform, police abuse reform, appellate reform, and prison reform, which is really needed in Michigan. And you know what we hear time and time again? Oh my God, when he gets out, it's going to be horrible. It's going to be horrible. So.
Wow, thank you so much for opening up about that.
Thank you.
Would you like to, Paula, would you like to share what you would like to leave our viewers with, and also for, your fiance who's here. Would you like to give him a message? And then also our viewers.
Yeah, thank you. So to the viewers, I just want to say thanks. I was actually just looking at I logged into YouTube on my phone, and I was trying to see if there were any messages. Temujin, real quick, your sister Angie has been watching, and she says hi. And then your buddy Dave from Flint is also saying, I knew this guy when we were in prison together, and he's totally 100%, innocent. And so he's out there fighting for you and answering questions. And
bless you guys.
And so I just wanted to say to the listeners, thank you for joining, for listening to us. Thanks for your questions and your interest, and thanks for your emails to our governor. Thanks for your support, and thanks for offering, share these videos. And we'll post some stuff in the comments if we're able to do that.
Absolutely.
And I just want to say thank you so much, Joy, for your.
Yeah.
Also, thanks very much, the voice of others that are going to help bring Temujin home. And thanks, Keith, for joining us. I know you're up north in your cabin up in the UP, and just thanks for
I'm jealous.
being here and
my home
supporting.
Yeah.
And, Temujin, I love him, and I talk to him all the time, and it's never really quite. We get short little calls, 15 minutes, and they're they go by so quickly. And but so this has been nice. It's been nice to be able to give him a chance to tell his story. Just again, it's just, it all boils down to the governor at this point in trying to get her support. However we can do that. Social media and sharing, it just seems to be our best bet at this point. And we're just trying to remain really positive. We're not going to, we're not trying to beat anybody up. We want to be, we just want to, we want everybody to know that, that they support, to show that you're supporting Temujin's release. And if you could just share that with the governor, then that is all that we can ask for and hope for. So thank you, everybody. And
absolutely.
Again, enjoy.
Thank you.
And
thank you so much.
Reach some and other things to.
Thank you. Thank you, Pumpkin.
Love you.
I love you too, baby.
Sending love to all of you. You are both all of you are amazing and inspiring, and I can't wait to share this. And I really was hoping I wouldn't get emotional, but this it's sad and it's infuriating, but I do feel that sense of hope as well. So I understand that. So again, just thank you so much for joining. And if there's anything I can do for any of you or this case, please don't hurt to reach out.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can I thank the listeners?
Absolutely.
All right. I want to say thank you to everybody out there for listening to me ramble on. In prison, you often are very limited in the amount of time you get to communicate. So I've developed this habit of trying to tell as much of the story as possible whenever I get the chance. And so I appreciate you bearing with me, but know that this matters. And this is not just about me. And obviously, I would love to see freedom, but more importantly, I've been in here more than half of my life. I would like to see change. I don't want this to happen to anybody else. And if something can come out of what I went through, and my case has led to some changes. As I say, I was the fulcrum on the Innocence Commission issue, and Michigan also changed the law on indigent defense and lawyers being paid for experts and things like that. That came out of my case also. If what I went through can make things better for others and make sure that this doesn't happen to others, or if it can save others that are in here, I hate to say that it would all have been worth it, because so many terrible things have happened and so many great people have been lost along the way. But at least something good came out of it, and that's what really matters. And Our governor, I know she believes in the issue. I know our attorney general believes in the issue because she established a whole unit for it. I want to give them the support to feel safe doing the right thing. And I want them to know that we're not going to let this blow up in their faces. We're not going to let people beat them up for doing the right thing. We're not going to let people put them down for doing the right thing. I want to support them. And the mere fact that the governor's staff have been so great, the mere fact that the attorney general has been so great, and her conviction units have been so wonderful, give us an amazing sense of hope. But the fight's not over yet. And even when it's done and I am free, there are other people in here dying, wasting away, losing their lives, their children, their families, their hearts. That matters. And it should matter to everybody out there. You don't treasure your freedom until you lose it. But I promise you, when you lose it, it's very, very hard to get it back. And I don't want to see this for anybody. I don't want to see this for a guilty person, better yet, an innocent person, not my particular ordeal, which has been, tougher than it has been for some. But just fight and care and believe you matter, your vote matters, your decision matters, your phone call, your email, it all matters. You're not just one person. You are a very important cog in a machine. And for that machine to run efficiently like a fine Swiss watch, everything needs to be lined up and synced and in perfect harmony. And we can get there. This is fixable. This is all fixable. We're seeing it now. So thank you very much. For those of you that reach out, thank you very much. For those of you who listen and aren't convinced, I love you just the same. It doesn't matter. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care,
Thank you,
everyone.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you,
Thanks,
Paula.
Adam.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So who am I still with? Who do I still have here?
Me, looks like Keith is still here.
Okay. Well, that was nice. How did I do?
Great.
Do you think so?
Everybody did awesome.
I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it's so
have
hard.
to. I'm gonna have to drop you off.
Okay.
Kensu,
All right.
Kensu, I'll talk to
Oh,
you
wait,
soon.
hey, wait. Do I need to know anything? No. Did I lose Keith? Hello. Who do I have here?
Oh, hold on.
I hear a guitar playing.
Yeah, Kensu, can you hear me? Listen,
Yeah, I hear a guitar.
tomorrow, I've got some things I got to go over with you.
Okay.
All right, bye.
All right. Okay. Pumpkin, are you still there? Hello. Pumpkin, are you still there?
No, I think she logged off. I don't see her.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that Joy?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought you were off. I apologize. I'm sorry. I won't keep you any longer. Listen, Joy. Listen. Thank you for what you did here today. Thank you very, very much. You're one of those people that I was talking about. You guys are like light shining in the darkness, and it's so wonderful that you even cared about this. And if I can do anything to help you in any way with the work you're doing out there, please don't hesitate to let me know.
Thank you so much.
And that counts for when I'm free too. All right, I hope to meet you one day. I got to at least take you guys out to lunch. So get your crew, whatever else helped here, and we got to get them a fine meal at the very beginning, at the very least. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Be safe and please keep in touch. And if you need anything at all, please let me know.
Right back at you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Joy. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.